Good morning, everybody.
Good
The Joint
morning.
Committee
Morning.
on the Budget and Government Operations and the Committee on on Public Safety subject matter hearing is called to order. This is a subject matter hearing to solely discuss the Chicago Police Department budget prior to the passage of the budget for fiscal year 2021. No vote will be taken at this meeting today. Pursuant to applicable law and our determination that attendance by remote means is necessary because an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent due to the declared public health disaster caused by COVID-19, this meeting is being conducted by teleconference. As a matter of order, the Joint Committee will take public testimony at the beginning of the meeting. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes for each speaker, and pursuant to Rule 58E, public comment will be limited to 30 minutes. We will now have a roll call of both committees to establish a quorum. Will the Alderman please make sure your microphones are unmuted? Thank you. All right, we have a quorum. That quorum number is 30. At this time, we will begin the public comment period. Out of respect for everybody's time, each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Pursuant to Rule 58E, public comment will be limited to 30 minutes. We have 7 speakers this morning who have signed up to speak. Our first speaker is Brian Bennett. Mr. Bennett?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Brian Bennett. I live in Edgewater. Other people are going to talk about statistics and science today, and you should listen to them closely, but I'm going to tell you a story. A few years ago, I needed help. I was in a crisis. I was being crushed by the pressures of our economy and debt. Like too many young Chicagoans, I was filled with self-loathing, self-doubt, and I had no hope for my future. Being deeply underinsured, I went to a clinic. A doctor came in. I told him I needed help. He said they had no mental health professionals available. He told me to get more sleep and eat more vegetables. He handed me a piece of paper with a dozen mental health clinics on it. Some of them were crossed out. They had closed already. I went to the only one that would take me. I met a therapist. In our first 3 meetings, I felt like she was moving me out of the danger that I felt I was in. The 4th time I came to her office, she told me it would be the last time. Her position was being eliminated, and so was the rest of the clinic. I asked her, where else can I go? She handed me a sheet of paper. I looked at it. It was the same sheet the guy at the last clinic handed me, but one more clinic was crossed off, the one I was standing outside of, the one I had needed desperately. On my walk home, I passed intersections with millions of taxpayer dollars of surveillance cameras, red light cameras, license readers. I passed a police SUV that could have paid for 3 of that therapist's salary and the 2 cops inside, each of whom could cost us millions in settlements. I passed a station where police spent millions surveilling my social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. Let me be clear, I'm not asking for more mental health clinics. I'm demanding that the $1.7 billion in the CPD be used to build, hire, and heal. Flood those billions into our neighborhoods, open hospitals, hire workers, build housing, reopen our eyes to what is possible in Chicago. When I sought help, I felt shame. I felt shame for using city resources that other people needed just as desperately as me. This is the world built for us. Do you feel shame, Alderman? Do you feel shame for raising our taxes, then spending it on guns, cameras, and SUVs when we need groceries, healthcare, and rent money? The thin blue line is the barrier between our current city and a truly thriving society, and you keep making it thicker every year. And if you don't feel any shame, I can recommend a good therapist for you. Wait, you fired her. Defund the CPD.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Our next speaker is Helena Duncan. Ms. Duncan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Helena Duncan, and I live in the 5th Ward, and I'm calling in today to express my unwavering support for substantial cuts to the budget of the Chicago Police Department. The CPD budget now is so unbelievably bloated. The amount of money that we're spending on policing compared to other areas is a really clear value statement about what's important, but it certainly doesn't reflect my values. When you have CPS students who are living doubled up with extended family and men and women sleeping in tents under overpasses because there's somehow not enough money to house them, when you have people such as the previous speaker going without necessary mental health treatment because there's somehow not enough money to keep clinics open, and yet somehow there's money for riot gear so that cops can cover their badges and beat teenagers with batons and pepper spray them in the face, all while being videotaped. Police misconduct and corruption and brutality run so deep here. There are still survivors of John Burge's torture who are in prison. And by the way, the memorial to those victims, which was promised as part of the John Burge victims reparations package, has yet to be built. Somehow there just isn't the money. Cops don't keep us safe. We can't even rely on them to put on a mask in the midst of a deadly pandemic. I'm serious. Look at any photograph of a group of cops responding to protests this summer or standing guard outside of the mayor's house, and you're lucky if a quarter of them are wearing masks as they were mandated to do. These cops aren't even interested in keeping themselves or each other safe, much less the communities they supposedly serve. Every single month, mothers who have lost their sons to police murder stand in front of the Chicago Police Board and beg and plead for updates to their cases. Is this our civic liturgy here in Chicago, our ritual of murder followed by investigation, followed by massive settlements, money that could have gone towards addressing the root causes of violence, money that will never be enough to bring back a lost life? Just earlier this month, you okayed over $6.5 million in payouts covering just 4 lawsuits, including a couple of police shootings and a case in which a cop was retaliated against for breaking the code of silence. Do you feel good about this? Cut the CPD budget and instead fund communities and fund non-police crisis response lines like those that have been successfully implemented in other cities. Get cops out of CPS, pass CPAC now, and fund the Police Torture Victims Memorial. Each of you with a say and a vote on this budget can ask yourselves whether you're willing to wait for the next George Floyd, the next unarmed Black person who will be shot or suffocated by one of our boys in blue, or you can begin to defund this system whose crimes are so beyond the scope of reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Our next speaker is Michael Emery. Mr. Emery? Okay, we'll move on. Our next speaker is Isabella Junis.
Alderman Burnett is here.
I have you, Alderman Burnett, Alderman Brookins, and Alderman Rodriguez.
Alderman Gardner.
Alderman Gardner, we have you.
Gotcha.
Alderman
Vasquez.
Alderman Vasquez, thank you.
Sawyer.
Alderman Sawyer, thank you.
Rodriguez Sanchez.
Alderman Sanchez, thank you.
Coleman.
Alderman Coleman, we have you. Thank you. Ms. Junis? Isabella Junis? Michael Emery?
If you press *6 to unmute, please.
Can you hear me?
Michael Emery or is Isabella Junis?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Ms. Junis?
Hi. Yes.
Please proceed.
Good morning. My name is Isabella Janusz. I live in the 48th Ward. I'm speaking today because I also, as the previous speakers before me, support defunding the police and reinvesting that money to other city services that would provide for health, housing, education, and other vital community services. Mayor Lightfoot has warned that we are headed for an estimated $1.2 billion budget gap in 2021. We know this is going to mean layoffs for city employees and austerity measures for vital services that Chicago residents rely on. It is unacceptable that the over $1.7 billion police budget can be this high when the results are so bad and when the services that we really need are on the chopping block. CPD accounts for over 40% of the city's budget, and what do we see from it? In the case of violent crimes, the murder solve rate has steadily declined for decades, currently around 40%, and that figure is considerably lower when the victims are Black or brown. CPD's arrest rate for reported rapes is about 6%. So even for the serious crimes of rape and murder, the police aren't going to help. especially if you're not white. They certainly don't do this well enough to warrant over $1.7 billion this year. I don't know anyone who has ever had a problem where police intervention made them whole, whether it was being robbed, physically endangered, or anything else. I do know people who've been verbally and physically threatened by cops at protests, who've been beaten, had their bikes stolen, had police drive their vehicles into them on the sidewalk, who've been in danger from another person, but who were too scared to call the police because they didn't want this person to be killed. But there's no one else to contact in such a situation. And of course, there's the ever-growing list of Black people and trans people who've been murdered by CPD, despite all of the money that's gone towards implicit bias training, de-escalation training, body cameras, and other reforms. Putting more money and resources towards reform is, at this point, irresponsibly ineffective. And spending over $500 million of our money over the past 9 years on police misconduct settlements that allow such behavior to continue is simply unconscionable. When you put more and more money towards one particular tool for dealing with a broad sweep of issues, from homelessness to how we treat children in schools to addressing domestic violence, addiction, lack of mental health resources, that's going to be the only way we address these problems, with force. We're limiting ourselves to one very, very expensive, entirely untrained for what they're called to do, entirely counterproductive and devastatingly harmful tool. That is what we prioritize over actual public safety. That's not right. I'm calling to advocate for defunding CPD and reallocating those resources to community care, public housing, and education, among others. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Junis. Our next speaker is Sheena Lilly. Ms. Lilly?
Yes, hello. I was going to say hello. This is Sheena Lilly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was going to say Mike Ermay is also here. If we can circle back to him after me, because the technology wouldn't allow him to unmute himself. Now we know it's *6 to unmute yourself. So if there's a possibility to go back, I appreciate it. Other than that, my name is Sheena Lilly, and I am a member of the independent political organization, the 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice. There are over 200 of us consistently calling Harry Osterman's office, writing him mail, and telling him that we want to defund the police. Osterman, we need you to listen to us. We demand immediate divestment in CPD and a reallocation of the operating funds currently allocated towards policing, which represents 40% of the city's operating budget and results in $4 million a day spent on policing. The solution to the impending eviction and homelessness crisis, the budget shortfall, and so many more issues that Chicago's face is to defund the Chicago Police Department by 75% and reallocate those resources to community care, public housing, and education. I am here to speak because I have lived in Chicago for 13 years. My first realization that the police are not here to help us was when I first moved here. I was attending a friend's birthday at UIC. I got off the number 60 bus to visit in a black dress and cute pink tights and Converse sneakers, thinking I was cute and wanted to spend time with my friends. I was immediately pulled into a police vehicle, an unmarked police vehicle, and interrogated in the back of the car as to what I was doing down by UIC. Was I a prostitute? Who was my madam? Who was my pimp? I was just trying to attend a birthday party. That is when I learned that the police are not here to help us. I walked away from that interaction alive, and I was lucky to do so, but my friend Sandra Bland was not as lucky. I want a defunding of the police department and a reallocation of those resources to community care, public housing, and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lilly. Our next speaker is Emma Pettit. Ms. Pettit?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Proceed.
Good morning. My name is Emma Pettit, and I live in the 32nd Ward. Today, I'd like to share a vision for what public safety reimagined could look like in Chicago. It involves reducing police budgets by 75% and investing that money directly into communities of color through public services. What the vision does not include is more police. The police have historically adopted a hostile and aggressive war on crime mentality that leaves Black and brown people imprisoned or killed. Defunding the police reduces their presence in poor communities of color, reducing violent police-civilian altercations. Research shows that crime is a response to social conditions. So by defunding and redirecting money into communities, violent crime is reduced, safety is increased, and communities are uplifted. Every single day, over 4.5 million of our city's budget is spent on policing. That's 1.8 billion every year that we give CPD, 40% of the city's annual operating budget. By comparison, the city only allocated 9 million per year for drug treatment, 21 million for mental health services, and 49 million for homeless services. This imbalance is stark, unjust, and needs to be fixed. Police budgets are consistently increased, diverting billions of dollars away from vital programs that support shared well-being, such as schools, hospitals, and libraries. As infrastructure in poor communities deteriorates, police are put there as a solution to solve every social problem instead of addressing the root causes. Police should not be a catch-all solution to social problems. By directly addressing the root causes of violence in our city, we can meaningfully address harm, invest in our communities, and build towards a Chicago that provides prosperity and dignity for all. Black organizers are calling for divestment from policing and investment in human needs across the country. I echo their call, and I urge City Council to take resources and power away from CPD and reinvest in community resources like public schools, mental health centers, housing, counseling, healthcare, jobs, addiction and recovery services, and other social services and community institutions. My few individual positive experiences with CPD do not outweigh the fact that policing and the entire criminal justice system was built on institutionalized racism. These systems will continue to be racist and corrupt as long as the budgets supporting their workforce are in place and their squads exist. I stand in solidarity with all communities and organizations fighting back against police terror. I denounce the police murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Laquan McDonald, and all who have died at the hands of police. To end the cycle of police violence in Chicago and across the country, we must go beyond weak reform measures, pass CPAC, and defund the police by 75%. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Pettit. Our next speaker is Katie Wood.
This is Katie Wood. I'm a Chicago resident. I live in Edgewater in the 48th Ward. I'm calling today to support community control of the police budget with the CPAC ordinance for an all-elected civilian police accountability council. CPAC will give its elected officers the power to hold police accountable for crimes and control the bloated police budget. Chicago is the only major city in the U.S. that has taken no major steps since the uprising started in May to control criminal police activity, and Chicagoans are demanding CPAC now. In addition to passing CPAC, City Council needs to reallocate 75% of Chicago Police Department's $180 million budget towards social services, schools, libraries, arts and cultural resources, mental health resources, housing programs, and education and employment programs. Chicagoans are demanding immediate budget cuts for CPD, including stops on new hiring, stops on weapons purchases, and firing cops with multiple misconduct complaints. In Chicago, 40% of our annual operating budget, that's almost half of all of our money, goes to Chicago Police Department. That's $180 million, $1.8 billion. What do the police do with all that cash? They torture, they lie, and they cover up. Since 2010, Chicago spent almost $500 million on police misconduct cases. Those who are sworn to serve and protect us are the same ones who threaten us most, not just with torture, murder, and rape, but that too, but by draining funds away from the vital resources in court settlements. We demand City Council cease negotiations with the Fraternal Order of the Police, which protects these lying and murderer cops with a blue wall of silence to cover up their crimes. Jacques Rivera spent 51 years in prison, wrongfully convicted for murder. Rivera's case was among 20 other wrongful convictions, and that's just for one detective. Rivera got $17 million in one of the largest police misconduct settlements in Chicago's history. Multiply that by 20 for each one of those wrongfully convicted people, we're at $340 million. That's almost half of Chicago's existing budget deficit for 2020. And that's just for settlements for that one detective's victims. What if that money went to funding mental health resources? What would happen if it went to reopen 50 schools that closed during Rom's sweeping shutdowns? What if it went to affordable and safer housing for people experiencing homelessness, to drug treatment and recovery centers and hiring programs? These investments have effects that will echo onwards for generations. We need CPAC now to keep Chicagoans safe through community control of the police.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. And our last speaker is Michael Emery.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Anyway, good morning. My name is Mike Emery, and I live in the 48th Ward. I've lived in Chicago for 5 years, and I've never been more embarrassed and ashamed of our great city due to the poor leadership of Mayor Lightfoot and many of our aldermen when in addressing the vital needs of Chicagoans in the face of COVID-19 and rampant police abuses that have shattered trust in our city and leadership. As Mayor Lightfoot has said, Chicago is forecast to have a $1.2 billion budget gap for 2021. Saying that the city faces painful choices, Mayor Lightfoot has threatened layoffs. The mayor's attempt to court casinos and gambling is pathetically short-sighted as well. As these committees and Mayor Lightfoot ought to know, sin taxes like gambling are regressive that hurt the poorest and most vulnerable citizens of Chicago. A clear solution is staring her and you in the face, defunding the police. Simply nibbling around the edges like police overtime is not enough. The Chicago PD must be defunded. Including the city's contribution to the police pension, the budgeted cost for police is now $2.45 billion. This number is obscene. This number is inhuman. This number is a moral declaration by the leadership of Chicago that brutality against Black and brown Chicagoans is more important than addressing the looming eviction and homelessness crisis due to COVID-19, among myriad other issues. Chicago's 2020 budget even sets aside $153 million for legal settlements due to police abuses. In total, the police account for 40% of Chicago's operating budget, $4 million a day. And yet, Mayor Lightfoot and some in the city council act like they don't know where we can get the money to close the shortfall. Some aldermen, however, claim that defunding the police is unpopular, that this is a niche claim by a few radicals. I'm here to tell you that this is a bald-faced lie meant to avoid enacting the popular will, not preserve it. My alderman, Harry Osterman, ought to know. I'm just one of the hundreds of members of the 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice. We have been relentless asking Alderman Osterman to listen to us and support the popular position of defunding the police. We call his office, write him mail, and even call into city council committee meetings on Thursday mornings while we should be working to tell us that we want the police defunded now. Instead of listening to us, what does Alderman Osterman do? He supports giving the police more money, such as the $95 million Cop Academy. He says he'll meet with Black Lives Matter Chicago and then never does. Alderman Osterman, I'm here and now demanding that you listen to us. I am demanding that you act on the Black Lives Matter demand to immediately disinvest the CPD by 75% and reallocate those resources to programs that will actually keep me and my community safe, such as community care, public housing, and education.
Thank you, Mr. Emery. That concludes the public comment period. I want to acknowledge Alderman Beal and Alderman Haddon have joined us this morning. Also, as part of the record, written public comment was received from approximately 300 Chicago residents, and each of those letters were emailed by the committee and has been provided to all the aldermen prior to today's committee meeting. And I just want to say that those emails, I think, are illustrative in that it provides an opportunity for public comment, public input, and I hope that you all will find those letters useful as we go into today's hearing. So again, this is a subject matter hearing to discuss the Chicago Police Department budget. It's an opportunity to learn more about the 2020 budget and to present ideas or suggestions for the 2021 budget, clarification of budget line items, an opportunity to do that, and to ask other questions. We will stay focused on the budget. No vote will be taken at this meeting. And with us today, we have Budget Director Susie Park, who will share a presentation. We also have Deputy Mayor Susan Lee from the Office of the Mayor, who's available to us this morning, and the Director of COFA, the Council Office of Fiscal Financial Analysis, Kenneth Williams, who will also share a presentation. And before we get started, I wanted to turn this over to my fellow chairman, Chris Taliaferro, who would like to add a few words. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll be just very brief. But I want to just particularly thank you for your leadership in bringing this matter, these committees together. And also, I want to thank Alderman Lopez for his leadership in bringing this very important issue regarding Chicago Police's budget before the City Council and before these committees. Look, the Chicago Police Department does have approximately $1.7 billion budget, and that's excluding grants that are allocated toward the Chicago Police Department. And even as we listen to our public speakers, we know that there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of suggestions with regard to this Chicago Police Department's budget. But I particularly want to echo somewhat what the Chairman Dowell has said, that I think there's a great time, and there is a time that we will have for that important conversation as well, and getting public input, because we have to make sure that public discourse is had when it comes down to this budget. But as for today, I think it's great that we could take this opportunity to discuss budget priorities with the Chicago Police Department, as well as offer suggestions to our budget director, Susan Park. So thank you, Chairman Dowell, for your leadership once again. And I look forward to having a great discussion regarding the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we get started with the presentations, I wanted to provide Alderman Lopez an opportunity to speak on his resolution prior to getting started. Alderman Lopez, thank you again for working with me around this resolution. Thank you for your leadership on this topic as well. And we'll turn the floor over to you for a moment.
Thank you, Chairman Dowell, and thank you, Chairman Taliaferro, for today's joint meeting. I think, as both of you stated, it's important for us to have continuous deliberative dialogue on the very important matter of public safety as it relates to our police department and our spending. I will be exceedingly brief. I look more forward to the words from our speakers and from my colleagues and from the citizens of Chicago, and we'll have plenty of questions later, but thank you for everything to bring this day to fruition.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Lopez. So first up, we will have Budget Director Susie Park.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to just go through a quick PowerPoint around the CPD. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Dowell and Chairman Taliaferro, and members of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Budget. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to begin this very important discussion and set the table today by just going over the basics of the police budget. You may have heard me discuss this on our Facebook Live page a week or two ago, but I did want to kind of really go into the different line items so that we all are on the same page as we begin this discussion today. So overall, as you see on the screen, as Chairman Taliaferro mentioned, the overall allocation for the police department is $1.7 billion. It's broken up among a variety of funds. The majority, as you can see, is in our corporate fund, which is about $1.6 billion. Grant funds account for about $81 million. We also have CPD personnel at our airport, so it's about $25 million in the O'Hare Fund. We also have the Police CTA Detail Fund for about $10 million, Chicago Midway Airport Fund for $8 million, and our Controlled Substance Fund, which is funding received from the state for about $100,000. So what you also see on the chart over on the right is that, as you also may have heard, 89% of CPD's budget is dedicated to personnel costs. So 1.56 million of the 1.76 billion, or 1.56 billion of the 1.76 billion is accounted for all of the personnel costs at CPD. The non-personnel side of the house makes up only about 11%, and is about 201 million. And then I'll go down and break that down for everybody. let's see here. Just very high level, here's the breakdown that you see across the sections. Now, I do want to flag that, as you probably know, CPD did a reorg under the new superintendent. So what you will see in the 2021 budget will be slightly different. But as it breaks down in the 2020 budget, obviously, most of the dollars are in the Bureau of Patrol. And then you see it kind of, the decrease here between organization development, detectives, organized crime, the technical services section, the superintendent's office, first deputy, and reform management. So this is kind of how it breaks down in the 2020 budget. Again, this will shift slightly as we put the reorganization in the 2021 budget. Across all funds, and I'll spend more time on this on the corporate side, you'll see again, this is all the different line items on the personnel side versus the non-personnel side. And you'll see that the majority, again, 89% is all around the personnel line items. And I'll go through these more in depth when I get to the corporate fund. Across positions, and so when we start breaking down that 89% around personnel, what does that make up of? Obviously, the biggest number of personnel is in the police officer title, and there's 10,140 PO titles, budgeted positions in the budget. And then you'll see kind of the decrease as it goes from there in kind of title budgeted position order. But, sergeants, all the other sworn titles really make up the bulk of that 89%. This is kind of a quick overview chart that shows you the full-time positions at CPD over the years. And so, back in 2011, it was at about 14,624. There was a decrease, and then we went through that higher surge again in 2017-18, which brought it back up into the 14,000s, 224. And then last year, the total number of budgeted positions was 14,665. Of that, just at a high level, sworn make up obviously the bulk of it. I think there's probably less than 1,000 civilians in CPD. So let's focus a little bit on the corporate fund, only because, that is where the bulk of CPD's costs are. So I do want to spend just a couple minutes here just to provide everyone. Again, 91, when you just break it down on corporate, 91% of the budget is dedicated to personnel versus the small 9% that's for non-personnel. So let's go through the quick line items here on the personnel and non-personnel side, just to give everyone a quick overview. The salaries and wages, again, $1.2 billion, all for those titles that we saw earlier. The overtime budget for CPD for 2020 was about, just on corporate, was about 91 million. Across all funds, including the airport, it's closer to 95. Duty availability pay is a contractually obligated line that's in both the supervisors and FOP contract. That's about 38.7 million. Last year, we also had a $31.8 million line item that paid for the retroactive salaries for the supervisor contract that was ratified by the city and city council. So that was also the retro payment that we provided to our sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. So that was in last year's budget. Uniform allowance is, again, another line in the budget that is contractually obligated. Same thing with comp time payment, the furlough comp time buyback, specialty pay. Those are all contractually obligated line items. So, and we do spend them down, per the CBA. Reimbursable overtime is a line where we do get reimbursement from CTA and the Park District for, a variety of different initiatives. So that's just a line item there. Salary adjustments is, as people enter into different steps throughout the year, the small amount. Supervisors quarterly, again, is another contractual benefit that we are required to pay to all of our sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. So that is also one that we can't shift too much. Tuition reimbursement, again, is a contractually obligated line item for reimbursement for various tuition for our sworn members, sworn civilian holiday pay, and salary pay. So these, again, are all, the majority of these lines are contractually obligated on top of the salary. So when you get into the non-personnel side, which, I've heard a lot about, cutting, I do want to flag that 100 million on the $200 million non-personnel bucket, which I think here it's 147 million of the corporate budget is non-personnel. If you take the 82 million, which is the settlements and judgments line, as well as this is the non-workers comp medical payment, which is 19, that gets you $100 million. So right off the bat, those are two lines that we can't very much adjust. We spent last year bringing the settlements and judgments line item up to really match the cost that we've incurred. So these two alone make up $100 million of the non-personnel. So now you're left with $47 million to support the rest of the department. And this is where you start seeing all the smaller line items. I do want to flag here that this consent decree line is just the non-personnel costs associated with consent decree. The larger portion of our consent decree costs, again, are part of on the salary and wages side for additional personnel to really help support the consent decree work that we're doing. So once you take out these top lines, you do really see that, you know, on the non-personnel side, there's not that much, and they're not these high dollar amounts to really get you to the real bulk of the police budget, which is really on the personnel side. So again, just on corporate, similarly, you know, the bulk of the positions are police officers at 9,805. So they make up 812 million of the personnel bucket. And then you kind of see, you know, the next kind of level of the budgeted titles, which includes detectives, FTOs, lieutenants, et cetera, working your way down. So again, really the discussion around, you know, the police budget and where the funds are is really going to really be had around the personnel. So this is the lastly our, if you wanted to see this chart, we do have it up on this website for additional information. So I will stop there with just the budget information and turn it back to Chairman Dowell.
Thank you, Director Park. We'll now hear from Director Williams from the COFA office, who has a presentation to share as well.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Morning.
Just wait 1 second for the presentation to appear. I took a look primarily at the corporate and enterprise budgets. These are the majority of the funding for the police department. As Director Park stated, majority of the police department's budget is driven by the contract, but by the police contract. So there's not too many items that can just be reduced during the budget process. The police department's budget is unique in that sense that it's different from the typical department where the operating budget is derived each year by the department heads and staff and is voted upon by the city council. On the next slide, we have similar numbers that was shown by Director Parks, showing that majority of the budget is personnel driven. Next slide, please. The recommendations that I have identified, I took a look at the primary, the essential things that drives the budget, which is primarily personnel. I also looked at some things that appear to be additional perks and things that are nice to have. As I mentioned earlier, majority of these items are driven by the contract, and these are things that can be looked at in the future negotiations of the police contract. Next slide, please. Okay, my personnel reduction for the corporate fund, it involves the supervisory quarterly pay as well as specialty pay. These are contract driven, but these items also stand out. It appears to me just from normal business practices that these items could be incorporated into the personnel budget and it wouldn't have to be necessarily a separate line item within the police budget. Next slide, please. Also, I identified a few non-personnel items, such as tuition reimbursement, uniform allowance, physical exam, and clothing. all of these are additional perks. Many of these items do not appear in any other department's budget. Tuition reimbursement, it's a nice to have, great service. Uniform allowance, often in case this is given out, but some officers don't require new uniforms. So this is a way that we could reduce the budget or negotiate in future contracts. As well as physical exams, this should be included in their employee health benefits, and it shouldn't be an additional charge. As well as clothing, similar with uniform. These items should be just the responsibility of the police officers, as it is for the majority of us as we get dressed and prepare to go to work. Next slide. So my overall recommendations for reducing the corporate funds for personnel is approximately 23.5 million, as well as for non-personnel, it's 30. So overall, we're looking to reduce the corporate funds. That would have to be done during the contract negotiations. Next slide, please. Okay, now the enterprise funds, which is made up of also the O'Hare Fund and the Midway Fund. And a lot of these same items that I discussed appeared in the corporate budget, and they would also appear in the O'Hare Fund budget and the Midway. For the same reasons that these items could be reallocated into the actual personnel budget outside of being a line item, and can be renegotiated in the contract agreement. Next slide. As well as for the personnel and non-personnel items are similar up here in both the O'Hare budget and corporate. These are also items that can be looked at and discussed to be reduced. Next slide. Same here for Midway, much smaller amount, but these are also items that we could take a look at and discuss on how we can reduce these funds and the impact to the overall police department budget in the future. Next slide. And it's pretty much the same here for non-personnel for Midway. Identical items appearing once again, tuition reimbursement and uniform allowance. Next slide. Overall enterprise impact. As I mentioned, it's a much smaller number, 855 million could be reduced. Next slide. Also, just a summary of overall reduction recommendations are listed here. And, as I mentioned, these are just discussion items and things that we can discuss in the future with the CBA. Next slide. Additional policy changes that I believe that can be done to impact and reduce some of the police settlements, which is one of the biggest cost drivers, is exploring and looking at officer liability insurance, where their share in some of the burden and the cost of settlements due to their actions. And as well as Director Parks mentioned earlier, there's a small percentage of civilians that work within the police department. And I also would recommend that for the officers that are working in administrative roles, that they be moved from the administrative roles to duty sign patrol-based functions. And this can also create a reduction and have a positive impact in reducing the budget. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Thank you, Director Williams. Before we go to questions, I wanted to give Deputy Mayor Susan Lee an opportunity to say something if she wants to at this time.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I think we should move on to questions. I'm sure there are many.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lee. Just want to lay out that questions from the members of the committee will be timed at 5 minutes. Timed at 5 minutes for the first round. We'll see if we need a second round. So we're going to get started first with Chairman Taliaferro.
Thank you, Chairman Dowell. And I just have a very quick question for Director Park. As we look at the personnel side of the police department's budget, and we look at attrition, and I know we're losing a lot of police officers of all ranks as it stands, which is going to create quite a few vacancies. Is it the goal of the 2021 budget to fill those vacancies and to keep up with attrition? And if so, have you considered the possibility of operating the Chicago Police Department on with regard to not filling those vacancies right away as we try to fill such a large budget gap?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. So we're working with the police department and the superintendent and his team to really understand what the staffing needs are going to be next year. I do want to clarify that while we've heard that the attrition numbers are not out of the ordinary, I know we've heard a lot about, that a lot of people are leaving, and, the attrition number is slightly higher than where it was this time last year, but it's not at that really high level that I think I've heard a few questions come up previously. But to your question regarding keeping up with attrition and filling those vacancies, I think that's part of the discussion we're having with CPD around the 2021 budget, as we do every year, and kind of what is the right number of officers that they need to accomplish and to meet all of their operational needs. So, we're looking at everyone's vacancies across the city, to be honest, as we're putting the 2021 budget and really trying to understand, what is the need at every department. So CPD is no different in that manner, and we are having those talks now about exactly how many of those do we want to fill, can we fill? Because if we're also in this COVID scenario, back when we were doing the hire surge, we were running, 100 classes a month, classes of 100 every month. Like that is not possible right now anyways. So it's really, what can we do? And then what is that right number for next year? So we are in the midst of that conversation.
And I certainly appreciate Director Williams' assessment. And I ask that you explore that a little bit along with Director Williams with regard to not necessarily a reallocation of police, but putting police officers in that are currently in administrative positions into the Bureau of Patrol. You and I spoke a little bit about this, about some of the positions that I've seen that are administrative, like graphic artists and things of that nature that are now being held by sworn officers. And I think we can do a lot to not only supplement the number of officers that are in the district, but it will also keep costs down from hiring more police officers as they attrition out. So thank you a lot for the good work that all of you have done in presenting this to us today. But I'd also like if you could provide a copy of your presentation to all council members. I think it will go good for us, giving us a better picture of what department expenditures look like.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Director Park, and Madam Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you, Chairman. We will get a copy of the presentations out to everybody today. Director Park, I'd like to want to be able to share information, right? So when you talk about the attrition numbers are different this year than they are from last year, what are those numbers?
So last year at this time, we had 431. Today we have 464. So all of last year, the attrition count for all of 2019 was 539. So, we're going to keep track of this, but, it is on par with what we normally see.
Okay. Is it your expectation that the year-end number for 2020 will be higher?
Than 2019?
Yes.
My understanding from talking to CPD is right now, those who have submitted, I believe we would not be, or we'd be around the same ballpark, but I guess, it's who will submit, get in those months that we just don't know yet. So we will continue to track, but we're hoping that it's, stays around the same.
All right.
But it's too early to tell, I guess.
All right. So we'll get started with questions, the round of questions, 5 minutes, starting with Alderman Sawyer, followed by Alderman Burnett.
Thank you, Chairman. And good morning, everyone. I really only have one question, and it was based on the slides that I reviewed, that were reviewed today. And I was wondering, Susie, why do we need a nearly identical budget for both the Office of Superintendent and the Office of First Deputy? I saw that they were nearly identical, and they were pretty high. I think they were in the 20-some-odd million dollar range for both.
Mm-hmm. So that's
why
really,
is that necessary?
So it's really down to the staff in those offices. And I think, that's one of the things we're going to talk about. And those numbers may shift as they have reorganized themselves, about who is assigned to the superintendent's office versus who's assigned to the first deputy's office. So that is something we will review as we work through their 2021 budget.
Thank you. It just struck me as being odd when I saw it. Chairman, thank you. That's really the only question I had right now.
Thank you, Chairman Sawyer. Chairman Burnett. Chairman Burnett.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Followed by Alderman.
Okay, I'm at the Plan Commission too, but I just want to ask one question. I want to ask how is the CHA, the police that work with CHA, are they not under your budget, or are they just under CHA's budget?
So we have, oh, go ahead,
I can
Susan.
answer that. So CHA has a separate security team that they contract with. CPD provides support for those facilities. Obviously, when something happens, there's coordination happening between CHA security team and CPD in those districts where those facilities are located. But there's not a dedicated CPD team at CHA other than the district officers that are in that near that facility.
I'm sorry, but I differ with you on that. CHA literally have police at every site sitting there, and they supposed to be like.
You know what? I'm sorry. I correct myself. There is a team that is assigned to those facilities, but they also do mobile patrol around that area. And CHA does provide funding for some of those officers. So I apologize. I was thinking about another scenario.
So that's not under the police department's budget, like the airport and other places. That's CHA. That's totally with CHA.
I have to defer to Susie in terms.
We do receive reimbursement from CHA for our CPD services. So, but it's not a separate fund in the budget like we have at aviation. So it's, if you, in my presentation, there's a line in the personnel budget that's reimbursable over time. That's where those, reimbursements would go.
Okay, so they because one of my because I'm trying to get those CHA officers that's assigned to CHA to be over the commanders in my ward instead of being separate entities. And I was trying to figure out how were they paid. So if they paid under the police,
yes,
it seemed like the superintendent can tell them to be up under the commander in that district, right? Probably. You don't know.
I'll defer to Susan. I don't know operationally.
I think they are already under the command of the commander in that district.
No, they're not. The Well, that's a whole nother story, but the budget part is they get paid from CPD through reimbursements from CHA.
Yes, I can tell you financially, we get reimbursement, and they're, assigned to CHA detail, but they are CPD, City of Chicago employees.
Alderman, I do apologize for my confusion, so I will definitely get more information on this piece and get it to you.
All right, because I'm asking the superintendent to make sure that those police officers are being told to do by the commander of the district. So anyway, so if they're getting paid through the police department, the superintendent should be able to tell them that they have to do what the commander says. Because some of them just sit there and don't do anything. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. Director Lee, he's absolutely right. This is probably something we definitely need to correct. Those CHA cars do not function under the direction of the commanders, just so you know.
Understood.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, point of information.
Yes.
Alderman Irvin.
Alderman Irvin.
Yeah, quick question. Is anybody from the police department going to be joining us?
No, we're not having, we're focusing on the budget today, and Director Lee is here to respond to police department questions to the extent that she can, if they're operational.
Okay, thank you much.
Okay. Alderman Moore, followed by Alderman Sadlowski Garza.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Alderman Lopez, for bringing this forward, and Alderman Teleferro for you all putting this together. Quick question: what's the difference between I know what uniform is, but what's the clothing? Because I thought that would be the same thing. So what's the clothing allowance?
I believe, and I don't know if Director Williams is on, I believe they're the same thing because there's only one line for uniform allowance.
Okay, so I don't know. I don't know if that was in Mr. Williams' presentation. So I thought.
Director Williams, can you respond to Alderman Moore's question?
Yes, they are the same. It's just one is driven by the contract, one is just supplementary.
Oh, okay, so it is pulled out. I get it. Okay, and then the tuition reimbursement from an accounting standpoint, does anyone know, is that still tax deductible from the federal standpoint?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So I can look into the tax deductibility of our tuition reimbursement.
And also uniforms as well, because I thought those were tax deductible as well.
The allowance?
Yes. And also the officer liability insurance, do we have any information if that's happening in any other city at this time? I know we talk about it, but has anybody looked to see if that is implemented in any other city at this time?
I have not researched to see if it's taking place in any other cities, but that's something I will look into, especially as we enter the 2021 budget.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Director Lee, do you know the answer to the Alderman's question on the uniform?
I do not.
On the tax deductibility?
No, on the
supplement?
No, the extent to which that operates in other cities.
No, that was based on the liability. That was the
insurance.
liability insurance question, Chairman.
I am not aware of another jurisdiction.
I'm not either. So
that doesn't.
I'm sorry.
So I'm not aware.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Sadlowski Garza. You're on mute. No. We'll come back to you, Alderman Garza. Alderman Martin, followed by Alderman Wagisback.
Thank you, Chair. I'm having issue with my video. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
A few questions. One, I know that for the budget that was passed last year, there was a line item for settlements and judgments, 82.5 million. Approximately how much have we spent to date that would correspond to that line item?
Alderman, I'll have to get back to you on what that breakout is from law.
Got it.
How much from there, yes.
Okay. Currently, how many vacancies are there in the department?
Total, I believe it's about, well, I have sworn vacancies, it's about 800.
Do you have any knowledge as to how that compares to prior years?
Yeah. No.
As a comparison?
Yes.
So that's a hard thing to tell. I can pull last year's number at this time, only because it's a very, you know, moment in time kind of thing. So it's hard to do like a exact comparison, but I could see kind of where we ended the year. Generally, I do think it's a little bit slower due to COVID. Over the last couple of years, CPD embarked on a hiring surge where they were really rapidly filling positions, 100 a month. And so, you know, this year is kind of one of the first years we've kind of slowed that down, and also around due to COVID, I think it's really slowed down more so than it has in previous years.
Understood. Yeah, I think that that year-over-year comparison, or even several years, just to provide that sort of context would be helpful, as well as if there's an approximate dollar amount that you can associate with that would be helpful.
Yeah, what I could do is kind of pull like where they ended the year with. It's a hard to do a moment in time just because it's constantly moving, but I could show where they ended the year with.
Okay, yeah, and then the approximate dollar amount too in terms of positions, I'm sure, you know, it's a real mix. Last question, I see in last year's budget, there was a breakout for traffic control section. There were about 117 personnel, is about a $10 million budget. Is traffic control the only section unit within CPD that's primarily or exclusively tasked with managing traffic issues?
My understanding of the traffic control is that it is not, they're a different function than like TMA, but they actually look at different traffic accidents and to that extent. But I could get more information on the specific traffic unit.
Yeah, that would be helpful to know what their core responsibilities are, as well as if there are other entities, individuals within CPD who are maybe primarily tasked with traffic-related issues.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I have for now. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, we have Alderman Wagisback, followed by Alderman Gilbert Villegas. Alderman Wagisback.
Now, Chairman.
Okay, you'll be after Alderman Wagisback too.
Did you have?
Yeah, go ahead, Alderman Wagisback, and we'll call Alderman Garza, Sadlowski Garza after you.
She can go ahead if I saw her hand up there. So if she'd like to go ahead, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you, Chairman Wagisback. I just have one quick question. It's actually for Director Williams. You kind of earmarked about $55 million worth of savings. All those would have to be negotiated with the contract, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I know we're in contract negotiations right now with CPD. Are those items on the table from our end?
I will have to defer to Director Parks regarding negotiations.
So I do want to flag, I think, I don't want to talk about kind of what's happening in negotiations, but I do want to flag that, you know, for our supervisors, that's already been contractually obligated. So to the extent that, you know, some of those lines are also for our supervisors, The uniform allowance, the supervisor's quarterly, those are already done as part of the PBPA approval. So those are contractually obligated until the next contract arises. So, you know, I think that the possibility for FOP is there, but I do, you know, because the supervisors have it, I do, you know, want to be realistic in that, you know, it could be difficult because, you know, the supervisors did get both the uniform allowance and I think the other one was, well, the supervisors have the quarterly, but, you know, FOP does not. So.
Right, but there was a lot more that Director Williams earmarked, not just the supervisor, not just the clothing allowance. So, I mean, I just want to know if those items will be tried to be negotiated on our end. Would that be a yes?
So I'm always up for trying that, but I think, you know, realistically, because the supervisors have it, I'm not sure how much we're gonna be able to get it from FOP, but I could definitely find out.
Thank you.
I also want to flag, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, that both the uniform, at least the uniform allowance, I believe our firefighters also have too. So, you know, it is across public safety that allows.
Right, but I'm not just earmarking that. Director Williams earmarked almost 55 million in savings, not just on uniform allowances, on a vast array of other things as well. They're all contractual, and I guess my question is, are we going to try? I know it's going to be hard because the supervisors have a lot of those things already, but I hope that, you know, our team, our lawyers that are negotiating this contract, hopefully can, you know, redirect some of that money and into the savings that Director Williams is allocating for. So
Understood.
that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Garza. We have Alderman Wagasbeck, and I see that my vice chair's hand has been waved. So followed by Alderman Wagasbeck will be Vice Chair Harry Osterman, then followed by Alderman Villegas. Alderman Wagasbeck.
Thanks, Chairman. Quick question on the enterprise fund. So if we were to make reductions in the enterprise fund, does that money stay within the enterprise fund?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that's pretty much a given. We can't take that money out and use it for other programming.
No, it would have to stay at the airports.
Right, and it doesn't, I don't know if there's programs there that are, or policies that are separate. I remember we had the issues with policing on the airplanes, the actual airplanes that we had a few years ago, where the chairman brought this issue up, and I don't know if that policy affects the way that they operate there, but training for officers so that they're doing better, not just the police officers, but the chairman, if you could remind me of the title for
the security, the aviation security officers. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if that funding can be used for additional training there, but I know that we continue to need it in some cases. The other question is on the cost of liability insurance. I know this is an issue that's being discussed in a lot of other cities. It's my understanding this is a state law that has to be passed. But if we were able to get our state legislators to move on that, what would the savings be in terms of liability insurance, and who would that cost fall on, if there were any?
That's a good question, because I know we have looked at this, and you're right that there needs to be approval. And I know that the comptroller had looked into this when the conversation came up. I'm not sure what the actual savings would be, depending on, you know, how much we're spending currently. So that's something I could go through the chair and see if we had an estimate for that.
That would be great. I think if the comptroller can kind of break that down for us, and if you could bring it back to the table, that would be very helpful to looking at one of the bigger issues here. Chairman, thank you. I'll pass on to my other colleagues so they can move into the conversation too. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Wagasbeck. Alderman Osterman, followed by Alderman Villegas.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have some video issues, but a couple quick questions. First, let me say thank you for doing this. I think it would have been helpful to my colleagues and I if there would have been some representation from CPD because the budget relates to operations. And I know we'll spend a lot more time on operations, but I think that would be helpful. But I want to ask a few questions. And this relates to, this can be to the chair in preparation of the budget, Director Parks, but the vacancy count, I think trying to get either quarterly or monthly vacancy counts going backwards the last couple of years, I think it would give the members of the council the ability to understand where we've been on manpower. So I think if there's a way to gather that data in preparation for the budget, I would appreciate it. The other question relates to overtime. So what were we budgeted in 2020 and what are we expected to land at?
So budget-wise, I think across all funds, it was about 95 million. We are expecting to land somewhere similar to where we were last year, I think, which was around 140. Yes, 140.
Okay. So 140, notwithstanding anything else that would increase that over between now and then. The other question relates to the consent decree and vacancies and staffing in that section. Where are we at as far as staffing up to make sure that CPD is doing everything they need to do to reach the goals of the consent decree? And if you could also touch on training, because I think that's another component of the consent decree, but more curious on the vacancy side.
Oh, on the consent decree, I have, what I can tell you is that we have approved and all the consent decree positions were a priority for our office for hire, even during the slowdown and the shutdown. I don't know, Susan, if Susan, if you have a better update on just consent decree overall.
Sure. So Alderman, we have filled many of the reform management office vacancies that existed in the project management team, which was a critical gap in terms of pushing some of the consent decree items forward. Certainly with COVID and the civil unrest and disturbances we have had multiple days sort of where people have been deployed. We have done our best to protect those who are working on the consent decree from being deployed out. And so only when on their days off, if they might be called in, would have been called in, but otherwise they are really concentrating on the consent decree work. And then training continues to be challenging, mostly because of COVID. I think finding adequate spacing possibilities and quickly moving to e-learning potentials has been the strategy, but because of the number of trainees that can be in the room together, and some things must be an in-person training, and because they're scenario-based or role-playing and whatnot. And so that's definitely been a challenging element to the training piece.
Okay. I think what I'd ask is that if you guys, between now and when we start to get into the budget conversation, if there could be more specifics about the consent decree section and who's working on it and how that's being filled on vacancies. And I think a little bit more illumination on the training side. I think the training aspect is critical, trying to make sure that we have a department that's doing what we need to be doing to ensure safety and just policing. And we're also wanting to see where we are as far as staffing goes. So I think as we get into this, I think I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, and Alderman, I want to clarify, that we had as part of the 2020 budget about 179 positions that we dedicated for a consent decree. And it is a mix of what Susan was talking about, civilians and project managers, as well as different sworn titles to help with training, the force review unit, crisis intervention, all those important key parts of the consent.
Okay. Chairman, no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Osterman. Alderman Villegas, followed by Alderman Kappelman. Alderman Villegas.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one quick question. The number of police officers that are performing administrative positions, what does that number look like? And could we save some money on overtime with those additional forces?
So there's been a lot of work this year. As you may recall, we did set up the Office of Public Safety Administration. And what the purpose of that was is to really move a lot of those administrative functions out of the department and into a core central department that would do that work for police, fire, and OEMC. So we are working through that transition, but with that comes, all the finance and administration, contracts, HR, medical, IT, all of those things that, a civilian can do has been slowly being pulled out of the department. So I know over the last several months, I know we recently just named the new executive director, Anastasia Walker. And so she is working through that, and I'm sure she will provide more updates as we get closer to budget, but there is a lot of work to move administrative functions out of the department and with civilians and to have those officers move out to the street, which I know the superintendent has started to do. And a lot of them have, especially with the movement of that function out of the department, have gone back. So we can get a better idea of what that number is as we get closer to budget.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, point of information, Alderman Scott.
Point of information, Alderman Scott.
So just to clarify, I just want to make sure that I heard Susie, Director of Parks, correctly. So you don't have an accurate count of how many sworn officers are doing administrative functions. We won't have that until budget. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
I don't have it today. I think there's a lot of movement with the transition into kind of who the different functions, and as it's getting pulled out of the department and that PSA is doing all the administration and a lot of that work, who has been moved out to the street. I don't have like a one-for-one at the moment.
Okay, when you get that, can you please forward that to the council? Thank you, Chair, for the point of information.
Thank you, Alderman Scott. Alderman Kappelman, followed by Alderman Ramirez Rosas. Alderman Kappelman.
I just want to give a little bit of a background so it makes sense to my question. I have 7 homeless shelters within 3 blocks of my home. And should a person be evicted from one of those shelters due to their behavior, they're left roaming the streets. I have 4 nursing homes for people with chronic mental illness, and the police are often called there when there's a crisis involving a client who's quite agitated. I have a 50-unit housing for people with mental illness who also have an addiction. And because they're not allowed to use drugs in their apartments, they use them on the streets. We had gunfire just in that area last night, about 20 shots fired. I have numerous housing units run by nonprofits where a disproportionate number of them experience mental illness. And I have 2 large homeless encampments a few blocks away from me with a disproportionate number of these people on disability due to their mental illness. And per an article entitled Social Defeat and the Culture of Chronicity, it was reported that the Uptown community has the highest rate of mental illness in the United States. So through the chair, I'd like to know more about the 911 calls that come through each of our 22 police districts. I want to know what the percentage of calls we get that are related to public drinking, because we have a lot of people with mental illness who self-medicate with alcohol. Mm-hmm. The percentage of calls related to homelessness, the percentage of calls.
Alderman Kappelman, I apologize for cutting you off a little bit, but we kind of want to focus on the budget issues here, and I understand the importance of the issues you're raising, but for purposes of this subject matter hearing today, we want to keep it focused on answers or questions that Director Lee, Director Park can answer with regard to the budget.
Fully understand, and that's the point of this question. if I hear from the police officers, they are very frustrated about being put in the role of social workers. The city of Austin uses social workers in their police departments. So I think it's fair to ask, can we look at the idea of having, as we get police attrition, can we have social workers replace them to address these crises that police are oftentimes addressing, which is not even related to why they entered law enforcement in the first place?
I'm going to jump in here, Chairman, and direct that question to Director Lee, because I know that this has been given some thought.
So Alderman, I appreciate that question. I think that is the question on the line, which is that, what are the right calls that police should respond to, and what are calls that perhaps police don't have to respond to. And I think it requires a lot of thoughtful process and thinking. And so thank you for raising that. As you know, some of these situations that involve mental health or substance abuse will turn into violence in some cases. And so I think what we at CPD and the City Hall Mayor's Office is contemplating is a co-responder model and piloting that in a few places to see how we can manage a kind of a menu of options of who might respond depending on severity and intensity and so forth. So we are working on that, but it is not yet ready. And certainly will be more ready around the time of the budget, because obviously a model like that will take a set of resources to make happen.
Thank you. There are cities across the country that are already utilizing something along those lines. I do like the idea of having social workers work with the police, because when the police go out, and I have observed a police officer give an ANOF to an individual who's had over 75 arrests. She's bipolar and alcohol addiction. I've seen her tear up the ANOF in front of the police officer and walk away. The police officer is frustrated, and this woman is frustrated. The community is frustrated. Having a social worker work with this person would make everyone's lives much easier.
So agreed. I think the issue, absolutely, there are many models out there, including Oregon and Houston and Dallas, as well as LA, many models out there. I think we have to find the one that fits Chicago, given the varying levels of intensity and potential public safety concerns around that.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Point of information on.
Alderman Moore, point of information.
Thank you for bringing that question, Alderman, but from a budgetary standpoint, would that help us based on somebody's experiences out there? If that number came out, because he was asking about costs, would that help us reduce police officers, or will we still have those police officers but adding social workers? So how can that or could that impact the budget?
It's difficult to tell until we try the pilot. I think we have to figure out whether, for example, the ratio of cases where only a social worker could respond versus where they have to be co-responding. And so until we actually have a good sense of the severity and intensity of those calls for service and how we respond, and did we respond well, and did it lead to good outcomes, we won't really know what the budget implications will be. We do know it will take additional resources that we will have to pull from the city and from multiple places in order to have the pilot run, but we're not sure of whether it does give us savings or not at this point.
Thank you.
Chairman, point of information also.
Point of information, Chairman Dow.
Yes. Director Lee, have you all already assessed the 911 calls to see what kinds of calls are that are non-police oriented what kind of calls are coming in and under what priority order?
We regularly assess the 911 calls around mental health calls, particularly because of a consent decree item around crisis response. We have not done some of the other categories that Alderman Kappelman spoke about, and we'll need to do that for sure as we move forward.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd also want to include domestic violence as well.
Thank you, Alderman Kappelman. Alderman Ramirez Rosas, followed by Alderman Rodriguez. Alderman Ramirez Rosas.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I would like to ask a couple questions related to a number of items that CPD has. So we've heard a lot in the news about Home and Square, some of the illegal activities that were going on at this CPD black site. This was first reported by the press some years ago. My question is, how much does it cost to operate Home and Square? And that could be broken down in terms of maintaining the facility. Is this a City of Chicago property? How much are we paying to keep it up and running? The number of personnel that are working there? What's the total cost of maintaining that facility?
Chairman, I'll have to go to AIS and get that information through the chair about maintenance costs for, it is a city building. So I'll have to talk to AIS to get that information.
Gotcha. So it sounds like then that there may be some costs that are associated with maintaining CPD facilities and functions that are not under CPD's budget as delineated in our city budget.
Correct. You know, the maintenance of city facilities is under our AIS department, our Department of Assets, Information and Services. So, citywide. So, you know, that is information that they would have regarding any police facilities.
And so that would probably include things like utilities. Would it also include things like technology, repairs, all of that?
Technology could be separate. There is a technology section that is actually now moved to PSA. So I guess it would have to depend on what specifically you're looking for. But, you know, utilities, maintenance, those kind of things would be under AIS.
Yeah. Well, I would also expand my question then to say, if we could also get the details on all of the money that is appropriated through AIS to maintain CPD facilities and a breakdown of that. Because I think that would be more indicative then of the true cost of the police department as it relates to our city budget.
Okay.
And then I know we've talked a little bit about attrition and retirements.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a sense in terms of just looking at the number of years that people have served and kind of where they're at in their career, how many people we're expecting to retire in 2021?
That's a good question. On average, our average retirement number is around 475, 500. I don't expect it to be, I expect 2021 to be similar. Sometimes we have seen when the contract has been ratified that there's a slight bump that year. But depending on that, you know, it could go a little bit higher. But the average attrition rate is between 475, 500.
Okay. And do we have a sense of, if we were not to fill those vacancies, how much would be saved as it relates to personnel costs?
Well, what I can say is, you know, an entering PO, I think the rate for an entry level PPO that goes into the academy is around 48,000 and some change. So, you know, even if you rounded by 50, it would be that multiplied by however many we're looking at.
Okay. And then last term, you know, the city council approved a new police and fire academy. At that point in time, the cost was given at about $100 million. Since then, my understanding that the cost has increased. So what is the total amount that we expect to spend now for the new police and fire academy?
I don't know that it's 100. I do know the previous number, which I think it was 95, I believe. So I'll have to get that through the chair if that has changed.
Yeah, and if we could also just know the sources of funding, is that coming through?
That is coming through capital. So you're not going to see that on any corporate budget.
Gotcha.
So it's
Okay.
on a bond. So that's, that is kind of the funding source for that.
Gotcha. But now the money to pay back that bond would be included in our budget.
The debt service? Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, yeah, that would be good to get those details.
Okay.
And then lastly, if I know my colleague James Kappelman mentioned the crisis response, I think that's something that's extremely important. I want to applaud my colleague Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez for her hard work in putting forward this proposal, and I look forward to working with you and others and this council to really figure this out, because I think that it will definitely help alleviate a lot of the issues that we're facing in our communities, while at the same time saving us public safety dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
Information, Chairman. Alderman Lopez, point of information.
Alderman Lopez, point of information.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, when this 2020 budget was passed for the police department, there were 821 vacancies that were included in the 2020 budget for the police department, totaling $47,460,600. I believe that's the question my colleagues are asking about. My question is to either Director Park or Deputy Mayor Lee, how many of those vacancies that were originally funded in the 2020 budget have been filled by an actual human being this year?
So I can tell you that that number continues to shift. And so I think when I gave earlier, the vacancy as it stands now for sworn is about 847, I believe. So that's what we have, because as you know, even if we're filling, it's also people are attriting out at a higher rate.
Well, if I may, Chairman, the question was for how many vacancies from the department. So this could be sworn or otherwise.
Oh, in the field?
I
got you. Okay.
Yes. So at the time, it was 821 positions in total, not necessarily just sworn or so how many of them have been either filled or deleted from or taken away?
From the 2020 budget, we haven't actually deleted any. I think what I'm referring to is at the time at budget, is that the number you're referring to out of the book when they came in at budget time?
This is from the document that I asked you for last year.
Yes, so that's from the budget hearing.
Okay.
Yes, so that's a moment in time. So, so I guess what I'm saying is right now, I believe there is across all funds, probably about 1,000 vacancies, sworn and civilian. So I can't tell you, from that moment, who came in and out. I mean, we could probably, but what I'm saying is today, a variety of titles and a variety of rates for that is what that vacancy count is accounting for.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Alderman Rodriguez, 22nd Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to also raise this issue that my colleague Alderwoman Rodriguez Sanchez has been raising around the CAHOOTS program. And I believe that's a program out in Oregon that diverts police calls, social workers. I think it's something we got to look at hard. I'm glad Alderman Kappelman and others have been talking about it. As a social worker myself, more on the admin side, I certainly get where we can potentially achieve efficiencies, but more importantly, serve the public better through that realm. So I know I heard some talk about a pilot, and I'm wondering, Susan Lee, if there's any more meat to that bone as we speak.
We are working through the specifics, and I'm sure more will be ready by the time of the budget. But this is something that actually has been in play for many, many months because of our consent decree requirements around responding to mental health crisis calls appropriately and with the right trained officers, but also other supports and linking them to other support services. So this idea of a co-responder model is something that's been under discussion for a really long time. And I think we want to proceed thoughtfully on making sure that this is the right model for Chicago. And I think that we have heard from some of the folks in the mental health expertise, CDPH included, that in some cases, there are some serious concerns around public safety when responding to a mental health crisis call. And so, you know, in the CAHOOTS model, it is not a co-responder model. It is just a diversion to a mental health professional, which I think makes sense in many cases. But there are certainly, I think, some public safety considerations around the safety of the social worker and the mental health professional who might be responding even, and maybe they're not able to diffuse certain situations. And so I think we have been discussing it for a long time and hope to have something ready, more substantive to share around the budget time.
Well, during this time, I'll be digging into the data and looking at those programs as well. But my assumption is that there's a significant number of calls where I think it absolutely makes sense for just a social worker to go out. But I'm glad we're bringing that question up. I'm glad you're thinking about it as well. I have a couple more questions. A colleague of mine has been looking at a couple of data points and noted that the 2012 CPD budget had about 1,000 fewer personnel than the 2011 budget. And we were just curious as to, you know, where those personnels were situated within the budget and within the department framework, and maybe what some of those decreases were attributable to.
So I could tell you historically that between 11 and 12, they did cut police vacancies in between those 2 years. I would have to go back to find out the specifics around which titles, but there was a cut. And then what happened subsequently is in, I believe, 2017, a lot of those cuts were added back in. So, you know, that's when I refer to the police hiring surge that happened a couple, 2 or 3 years ago. There was an increase back to PO titles, detectives, sergeants, and lieutenants. And so I could break that down and go back historically to find out what those cuts were between those 2 years.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know through the chair. And I think my time's coming up, so I just had one more question. I'm interested, and I've been interested in traffic control, very similar to the issues with the calls to police. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious if that's something we might be able to spend elsewhere. What's the total spend on traffic control in this previous year's budget?
So when you talk about traffic control, you're talking about traffic management at OEMC?
I think that's right.
I could pull up the budget if you'll give me a second. I do have OEMC's budget. Although I don't know, so the hourlies are in the budget. There are hourly positions for the traffic control aides, but it was about 4.2 million. It looks like, just looking at the top of my in the book, but I could provide additional information to you on the breakdown for traffic.
I'm also interested in, I guess I'm going a little bit deeper than just that line item. I'm interested in how many of our police officers are actually doing that type of work. I think that's another space that I'd be interested in learning about. I'll leave that with you, and potentially, you know, the long list of questions through the chair, potentially.
Okay, I will look, you know, I do think the earlier question about the traffic section, they're more focused on traffic accidents and, you know, the work around that versus the traffic control aides, who are the ones you see directing traffic. So, you know, I don't know if that's still a function. Obviously, we see police officers in an accident directing traffic away, but, you know, I don't know if it's a specific function. So I will dig a little deeper into your question around traffic control.
Okay.
Okay.
Madam Chair, or Chairperson, I think that's what I have for now. Thank you. Alderman Taliaferro.
Thank you, Alderman Rodriguez. Before we move on, I just have a couple of clarifying questions for Susie. Alderman Ramirez Rosa asked you for a breakdown of the costs related to the spend with the various facilities. Can you include with that a list of CPD facilities that are used by the police, or facilities used by the police department that might be under the control of AIS? So we just know where they are.
Yes, I thought the question around facilities was specifically around police facilities. So what that
That's what I'm
breakdown is.
talking about, CPD
Okay.
facilities.
Mm-hmm.
They're not all like, what do I call it, like district headquarters, there may be other facilities that we don't know about, so we need to know. And the second question I have is around the 1,000 vacancies. Are you thinking about ways in which that number might be reduced in the 2021 budget in order to, save money?
Yes. We are looking at every department's vacancies across the city. So like I said at the beginning, CPD is no different. So we will look at all of those vacancies to see what needs to carry over.
Okay, and then my last question is, how much is in the forfeiture fund?
So the Forfeiture Fund is actually appropriated as a grant program. So last year, I believe it was about $4 million. Let me pull up it was about 4.7. So there's 3 different programs under under asset forfeiture. We have 2 federal ones, one that runs through the Department of Justice and one that comes in through Treasury, as well as the state asset forfeiture. We do appropriate that the year after. So under state asset forfeiture guidance, we are not allowed to appropriate as it comes in that year. So we collect what came in that year and then we appropriate it. So what you'll see in the 2021 appropriation is what will have come in 2020.
And
so
how is that money used by the department?
Generally, it's very much law enforcement. There's guidelines around that it's around what it can be used for. At a high level, I believe, in the past it's funded some SDSCs. I believe there's some vehicles, there's training that comes out of that. Generally high level, law enforcement activity.
Okay, is that potentially dollars that could support the social work component that you all are looking at?
So that's a good question, only because it's very law enforcement. So I guess in the tie that the social work, that there's law in the tie-in with law enforcement, that's something that we could definitely look at. The guidance around asset forfeiture is, mainly around law. So if it was outside of that, if this was a program that health was running, for example, we could not. But if it's something that's tied to something at CPD, that is something we could definitely look into.
All right. Thank you. Questions now by Alderman Roboris, Chairman Roboris, followed by Chairman Brookins. Chairman Roboris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Talaferro, for bringing this discussion to all of us. There's a lot of questions, obviously. I don't know that any of them have been answered, and I've been writing questions on my paperwork here. And my concern is that I think aviation pays or refunds us for the personnel that are used in Midway and O'Hare. Is that correct?
So the officers assigned at the airport are directly on the airport fund. So to that extent, yes, they pay for them.
We don't pay for that.
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's a good thing. Now, there's grant dollars that you mentioned earlier, and are there any grant dollars that may be eliminated for the 2021 budget that we need to be replaced by the police operations budget? I don't know if I worded that correctly.
So are there any grants expiring in 2021 that we would have to supplement in the police operations budget?
Correct.
I do not think so. I mean, there are grants, a lot of the CPD grants are annual. So they will re-up the next year, maybe at a possibly a different amount, but as far as I know, there's nothing that we're gonna have to absorb on the corporate fund for a grant program that is not going to be there.
And the other thing, using personnel that we had personnel that were working behind desks. I thought that was resolved a year or two ago. Is that
So
still
we have
the issue?
We have been working on civilization. I've myself have done probably 2 rounds of civilization with the police department. So we went through a big round in 2016 where we worked, you know, we civilianized a variety of different functions. And then last year again, I think the PSA model is going to be successful and really take those administrative functions out of the department while supporting the department and allowing civilians to do that work. So yes, Alderman, to your question, we've done a couple rounds of civilianization. It's always something we're looking at to continue to see if there's any other functions that officers should not be performing and be out on the street for, which a civilian can do. So that is a constant. And that, you know, even with the PSA, we'll continue to look at the police department.
Thank you, Susie. And the other, it's not a question, but a comment that I have is that, you know, the truth is that before we agree to do any contractual matters, all the final budget numbers so that we can vote on this is that, I don't know if the superintendent's going to make the decision on this, is the fact is that we are still today, in fact, yesterday alone, we're still pulling police officers from districts to move them to other districts. And you know, that, in my opinion, should not continue to happen. I think yesterday alone, we only had about, maybe, if we're lucky, 12 officers working in one of our districts on the northwest side. We need to really give this some thought, and we need to put personnel where they belong. And please, I mean, you know, consider this, because all it takes is one time, one issue, one instance where are the police officers, and it's continued to happen, and we're hoping to address this. This should be a matter that should be resolved before we finalize on this budget. And that's all I have, Madam Chair and Mr. Chairman. Thank you. But Susie, see if you can address that as well. Not now, but you know, in the next few weeks that we have, or a month. But thank you for everything that you guys are doing.
Thank you, Chairman Raborez, and I want to acknowledge your last point, because I think that's something that a lot of people are talking about and should definitely be part of our discussion heading into the budget.
Absolutely.
Chairman Brookins. Chairman Brookins, followed by Chairman Smith. Okay, Chairman Smith. Okay, she's gone. Alderman Hairston, followed by Alderman Thompson, followed by Alderman Irvin.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I am here. Do you want, Alderman Hairston can go first. Of course.
You can go, that's fine.
Thank
you. The whole time, so it's okay. Go ahead.
I actually couldn't get my video background to go on.
Go ahead.
So I just want to focus on 2 items, which is Budget Director Park. Can you please tell us how many police officers are assigned to the JISC, and what is the function of each of those officers? I understand there's detectives and officers. I'd like to know what they do.
I definitely cannot answer the what they do question. I can, if you'll give me a second, I can look at what the number is in the JISC assigned in the budget.
And how many positions are there too? Yeah.
So in the budget, there are 50 positions that are budgeted in the section for JISC.
And how much does that cost us?
It's about 4.7 billion.
That's 4.7 million, and then, but that excludes insurance and pension and all that other stuff, right?
Correct. It's just salaries.
It's just salaries, and then to the extent that those officers get those other list of benefits that were listed in your other chart.
Yes.
Does it include those, or is that off as well?
So the way the budget looks in the sections, it's just the salaries. We compile the supplemental pay for our officers as a whole. So
Okay, so what's the percentage, just so I get a sense? So it's about 5 million, and then what's the general percentage of the supplemental pay? And I'll even leave out pension because, you know, if it's replaced with something else, those people have city pensions. But all that supplemental pay is what percentage of
the payroll?
Of the salary. So if the salary is 100 and benefits
So
are
that's
20, you know, 20%, you know. So it's an easy, I'm just looking for that quick calculation.
I would have to, if you'll give me like 2 minutes, I'll get right back to you because I have to look. Each one gets duty availability, uniform allowance. And I would say it's probably like 2-3% on top of that for all of that. But let me do the math real quick and I will get that to you.
Okay, while I'm asking the question. So the question that I have about the JISC is, and then we also spend about we have been spending about $500,000 in the social services budget. So we had a very detailed oversight hearing about it, at which the Inspector General essentially said that the JISC isn't working and that there was no way to prove whether anything that anybody was doing was actually helping. So my fellow Alderman Rodriguez and Kabelman, I really want a programmatic review of whether what the JISC is doing should continue in its current form. And I know that you all are looking at it, but now it's budget time. And if there's a time to pull the plug, it might be now. I mean, as I know the officers in the JISC, many of them are very well-meaning, but as we said in our oversight hearing, you know, there are just problems. It's only available in a few districts, and the police officers are expensive, and they're trying. Many of them are actually trying to help these juveniles in very sad situations to get out of crime, but it hasn't worked. So that $5 million a year might be better served going to a different kind of program. So I kind of want to know really what the savings could be from that.
Okay.
So, Alderwoman, if I can just interject.
Yes.
So, you know, with the IG's report and additional consent decree requirements around changing CPD interactions with young people, the mayor's office has really been deeply involved in changing the way JISC works. Obviously, we have to do it in stages and bring in the right service provider. But as you know, the young people who are accused of a more serious crimes actually go through the districts, and it's the young people who are less risky, minor offenses who go through JISC, and it is really meant to be a diversion program so that you do not become involved with the criminal justice system. And I agree with you that it hasn't really served that purpose, but I did want to just let you know we are in the thick of it in terms of trying to reform practices there, primarily because as part of the consent decree requirement.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure my fellow co-chairs who were heading that oversight hearing would be very interested in knowing, you know, the precise status. What can you tell me? What's this, when you say in the thick of it, what does that mean?
So we want to, you know, as you know, DFSS decided that they would no longer support the service provider there at the end of December of this year. And so we are working with community providers to augment and potentially provide the kind of services that involve a street engagement, home visits without officers, to better engage and bring young people to services and make sure that service delivery is happening. And obviously fixing the data issues, which is a lot of what the IG's report was about, was that we could not track outcomes as a result of not having good data. And certainly changing some of the protocols so that services come up front rather than the arrest processes. So those are some of the changes that we are working through at this moment.
Okay, and do you believe that as a result that that we could consider civilianizing some of the activities of the former JISC and making it less of a only law enforcement centered approach.
It cannot be a law enforcement only approach as the diversion practice, as you know very well. Practice
Yes.
diversion is a multidisciplinary approach with more of the youth development focus and age appropriate services being upfront rather than in the back. And so we are trying to move in that direction. And I hope that we are, I think we will be successful, but these are some baby steps we're taking right now.
Okay, well, you know, you have a lot of support for doing that. And I look forward as we get closer to the actual budget season, which is in a couple of weeks, to see what the impact of that is on our budget. And Madam Chair, if through the chair, I could actually get the answer to my questions about what these police officers actually do.
Right, I would, and if you don't mind, I would add to that the non-personnel costs related to facilities and the money spent on the GISC is also important to look at.
All right, thank you.
Point of information on that.
Alderman Moore.
Yesterday, we did the ribbon cutting for the county side for something similar. And it sounds like it's not called JISC. I forget what the name of it was, if any of my colleagues from Inglewood is on the line. But you know how we do the Chicago Cook Workforce? And when because we used to be kind of separate, and then they combine those. Can we think about doing that with the city? Because it seems like the city and the county are doing some of the similar things there, and can probably have some, collaboration there in terms of what they're doing. So somebody need to look at that, and if that's a possibility.
Absolutely. Happy to look into that.
Yes, and on Alderman, I completely agree with you. And at our hearing, you know, one of the best models in the country is in Miami, in which the diversion program is absolutely a countywide program with like 30 agencies or something. So it's a really robust model. Of course, it needs funding, and that's why I'm talking about the role of police who are being asked to do something that is, in my view, not really the best use of police money. Then I only have one other question, Chairman, which is that with regard to the issue of liability insurance, I used to sort of do this kind of work. I did do this kind of work in private industry. And, you know, personal insurance sounds like a great idea, but if you require personal insurance, certainly our police union would demand that be paid for by the city. It doesn't necessarily lessen the city's liability, because we are liable as the city for having employed the guy. And if he was doing it in the ordinary course of his business, he's liable. But what is interesting is that Colorado just passed a law with the full support of the Fraternal Order of Police of Colorado that overhauled their own police accountability system in a lot of ways that are completely similar to what we've already done here in Chicago with regard to use of force and stuff like that. But they also enacted a first in the nation provision with the support of their union that if a police officer have found to acted in bad faith, he could be personally liable up to $25,000. Now, that was passed this summer with the support of the Republicans and the Democrats, which capped liability at $25,000. And it is something that I think is really worth looking at. Now, I will also say, however, that in the wake of that, several towns in Colorado have already vowed to defy that, even though the law prohibits indemnification by the municipalities. But you know, that's one thing that's done. The other thing is that I wonder whether police, and this is a question for the budget director, is we are self-insured. And the question for the budget director, is that really the right thing to be? Because my understanding is that there are some municipalities in which the insurance company got involved to help force changes in smaller municipalities, to force changes in police conduct because the insurance company's risk managers said you have to get the risk down. Now, I know that this is part of the approach that the city is taking with a risk manager, but I've often wondered why we have such a low self-insured limit, and wonder whether if raising our insured limit would provide an additional incentive towards helping correct police behavior.
Thank you, Chairman Smith.
Susie?
Hold on, does anyone want to respond to that?
What I can say is that's interesting, and something to think about the self-insurance and what our rate is. I do, like you alluded to, Alderman Smith, Tamika Puckett, who is our risk manager, is doing a lot of work around, how do we reduce our risk? What are some of the things we can buy down on? How do we improve the way we are doing business to bring down that risk? So I think that is an interesting notion that I we'll definitely talk to the comptroller about, but I don't have an answer, I guess.
Thank you very much, Director
Thank you.
Parks. Alderman Hairston, followed by Alderman Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of questions that you all have not already addressed. So with the detective's budget, have you done an analysis of that department, seeing as though their success rate is so low? I wonder what they're doing. And, so we really need to look at whether what they're doing is efficient or not. And I'm sorry that there's not someone here from the police department to talk about that. The other program that I would like an analysis into is the CAPS program and its effectiveness or lack thereof. And, the staff keeps getting larger and larger, and they create all these different arms, but yet it's not really having an impact on the violence nor the participation from the citizens. Have you looked at the cost for the take-home vehicles?
In terms of, we are very much looking at all of the vehicles at CPD and doing that. We are working through that analysis now, and just vehicles in general. As we're talking about capital, what is the right number? What types of vehicles? Who is, to your question, Alderman, who is taking them home? Do they need all those vehicles? That is very much something we are working on and looking at.
Okay. And again, I'd like to see an in-depth analysis for domestic violence and crisis response, because I do think that is where we need to start putting some of the money.
Mm-hmm.
And while calls for service are some type of indicator, I do not believe that we need to continue this antiquated theory that if there's not calls for service, there's not crime happening. And again, I think the pandemic has, just brought this out, the disparities between the communities. And so there's never been a correlation between the calls for service and actual crimes that are being committed. Yet the city of Chicago has continued along this path, which disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. And so I'd like to do an in-depth dive into that. The other thing with the asset forfeitures,
Mm-hmm.
If that is used only within the department, then we can take that amount out of their budget and allocate it somewhere else. I think a lot of the issues with the personnel at the police department is nobody really has a good understanding of what they do. And
Okay.
but if we're looking at every city department, we know that in the Department of Planning and Development, that if they're in charge of land, that, you know, we don't have that understanding, and they make internal decisions or changes or transfers, and we have no idea. Because it does not make sense that there is nowhere in that budget that can be adjusted. So you know, and I'm willing to help, you know, to help you to that extent. But we really have to get a handle on the programming and the things that are not working, and you know, people that are getting paid for doing jobs that they're not doing. So those are my only questions.
Thank you, Alderman. And in terms of asset forfeiture, the only flag I will put is that it's not a consistent amount, because obviously it's dependent. So the only risk we would run there is just, you know, then it just kind of goes back and forth depending on what that amount is per year, and then what has to go back on corporate. So that is something we've looked at.
You know, I've got a little bit of experience in that area. Having worked for an agency that did a lot of the asset forfeiture. So they usually operate at a surplus. And they hold on to that money for special projects. In light of COVID and the budget deficit that we are facing, nobody can hold on to anything extra.
And I agree with you there, Alderman.
We can't afford that in 2021. So all of these additional funds and things that departments hold on to, we're going to have to really get in there and trim those, if not eliminate them for the next 2 years. You know, because we can't ask the taxpayers to do more, and we're not doing our darndest to make sure that everybody is operating where they need to be.
And, you know, I appreciate any input. You know, we are going department by department, as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, looking at programs, looking at positions. So if there's anything, you know, that you may know or others may know that you want us to look at, we could also definitely do that too.
Well, I think you look at some of the delegate agencies and how they're performing,
yes.
You know, because, you know, what we're seeing here, it's, you know, there's a lot of people sleeping at the wheel. So thank you. I have nothing else, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Hairston. Deputy Mayor Lee, do you want to just chime in here on the reassessment of caps and the detective division to the extent that you're looking at that?
So obviously, thank you, Chairwoman. The detectives division, as you know, there was a perf report that came out and gave us some really good guidance on how to improve the Detectives Bureau. And I think many of those activities have taken place in terms of creating a uniform standard for investigation. I think the biggest move that we made was to create the 2 new areas, because one of the things that we found was that detectives were too far, because we only had 3 areas at some point, that detectives were having to travel too far and were not getting there in time to really, and didn't really have the relationships in the community. And so going to 5 areas certainly allows some of the efficiencies there. And we also, you know, what the perf report did note is that Chicago Detectives Bureau is understaffed. And so the detectives are having actually a greater caseload than some of the other large city departments. And so we took that report from, you know, a subject matter expert as perf really seriously, and are working on those reforms. And so that's one thing I do want to say about that. Caps, again, I think this superintendent—
Director Lee, if I can interrupt you for one moment. Have they solved any more crime? Have they solved any more? I mean, have they solved any more cases?
They continue to solve cases, obviously, throughout this year, and we continue to work on our clearance rate.
So I'd like to see those numbers, if you could provide those through the chair.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. On the CAPS piece, I just wanted to say that the superintendent is very much focused on improving CAPS. And as you know, part of, I think, our approach to building relationships is through this DCO program, as you may have heard, that accompanies an ambassador council. And we hope that is a different way of looking at—
Director Lee, You keep saying, as I may have heard. If I did not hear it from you and you have not briefed us on it, then I have no way of knowing what you are doing, and that's part of the problem.
Well, I'm
That
sorry.
is part of the problem
There
with
was a press
the
conference
aldermen.
about the DCO expansion 2 weeks ago, I believe.
There was what?
There was a press event by the superintendent and mayor around the DCO.
Was I invited? Was I invited?
I'm not sure.
Well, then how would I know? I have a ward to serve. I have a constituency to serve, and I cannot run my day trying to figure out who's holding a press conference when I am an elected part of this body. We are supposed to be working together. When you operate all on an island by yourself, we don't know what's going on, and that is being seen now throughout the city of Chicago. So no, I don't know what you're doing. And unless you tell me, I have no way of knowing.
Briefing on the DCO program, Alderwoman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hairston. Alderman Thompson, Daley Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman Dowell. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you and Chairman Talaferro having this meeting as we get ready for budget season. So a couple of specific questions. We talked about, Susie, you mentioned there's roughly on average about 500 police officers that retire a year. How many new classes, how many new cadets do we have in class right now for new recruits?
That number, let me see if I have that with me. Is not our normal number, because it is lower due to COVID. Let me see if I have my class list. I think we had one class of 90. Oh, hang on. I think it was 90 total this year, or it's 50 and a class of 40. And then we're gonna have 2 more classes towards the end of the year as well.
Okay, and you'll get us that information and also the anticipated retirement for 2021 as well. I'm sure that'll come through with budget.
For 2021, that will be, yeah, we'll have that closer to budget.
Yeah.
We'll know who will have submitted hopefully by then.
And then in terms of through the CBA, do we have a minimum number of officers required or no?
No, so minimum mannings on the fire side, but we don't have that on police.
Okay. And then do we have, you mentioned $48,000 for the new sworn officer?
Yes, that's just year 1. But that's where
their salary.
Yes. So year 1 of when you're a PPO, that starts at 48, and then you move, by year
to
2
72
to like 60. Yeah, and by 3 it's 72. Yes, correct.
Okay, and then with benefits and everything else, how much is it for a fully, a third year, let's say, after their PPO, they get through what is the total all-in cost for a police officer?
An
If you don't
average.
have it now, Susie, you can get it to us.
Okay. I mean, but an average rate of a police officer is somewhere around 80, and then with just fringe is another 45%. I mean, it's definitely like 120, 130.
Roughly 100.
It's probably in excess of 100, but yes. But I can get you an exact number of an average cost.
If we could. And then you mentioned on the overtime, budgeted was 95. We're actually somewhere around 140.
Well, that's the anticipation for year end.
Right,
We're at 95 right now.
Sure. And I know last year, when you came in, one of the benefits was you were over there before at the police department before you came over. And I know one of the concerns I had and a number of my colleagues was the actual procedure for overtime or lack thereof. And it was just sort of, if you don't have it now, but a lot of these are sort of anticipating the budget hearings. Do we have that procedure in place? Are we following that procedure? And maybe that would be something, if you don't have the answer now, we can have coming forward with, budget season?
So we actually did a lot of work with the police department to set up the procedure to
Yeah.
really work through all the overtime until COVID-19 hit and kind of threw everything awry. But, they were actually making some pretty good headway. As you know, the superintendent came in, and at one point it was, I think, commander and above, and then Superintendent Brown came in and changed the approval process to deputy chief and above. So there is a lot of oversight on overtime approval. I do want to flag.
Why would COVID, I'm not sure, I'm sorry. Why would COVID affect the procedure for approving overtime?
Oh, COVID does that. I'm sorry. I just meant that as like the number. So we were doing okay on the budget until, COVID and the protests, and I do want to mention to everyone here, I know, we're at 95 now, which I know is at budget. But if we took out, the 45 million, for that 1 month and whatever's coming, if you took out the protests, unplanned cost, we would be on target. So if you took that out, we would only be half of, the 95 as of June. And they were for each of those holidays, they were lower than what they have been in the past. So, CPD, to their credit, we were on track to at least, meet budget, if not slightly over, but we would not have been, back to where we were last year had it not been for, all the unrest and everything that kind of came together this year. So there is an approval process. We've done a lot of work, by unit, by bureau, to really figure out what that right number is, until everything kind of, until everything happened this summer, they were coming in monthly, weekly, and we were drilling into, what drove overtime for each unit by unit. So there was a process and there is an approval process in place now.
Okay, I mean, yeah, the approval process, no matter what it is, if it's social unrest or COVID or uptick in gang shootings, there's still a procedure in place. So if we can maybe send that to send it through the chair, exactly what that process is, because as you said, it changed with the new superintendent change again. So I would just like to know what that is as well. So if you can, whatever internal memo or whatever you have.
Or we can kind of, I can bullet out kind of the work that we've done around overtime.
Sure, because I think there's a lot. And, as it relates to that, every year now, and I've only been here since 15, but, we have budget discussions and we come up with recommendations and departments, and in this case, the police department will say, yes, they're going to do this or do that. I just want to put out there that when we come into this budget, I don't want to have the same conversation. I would like to have updates. And so they should go back and look at what was discussed last year and come back with where they've made progress from last year and address what issues were asked and let's address those. It's sort of like, moving the officers off of desk duty. I think it was 3 years ago, I suggest we throw out the desks because every year we have officers at desk duty. And if they don't have a desk, they can't sit there. They should be out in the field. So if we can make sure we do that for budget, and then just sort of an overall comment as it relates, this might be for the deputy mayor, is with the JISC, and I commend Chairman Smith. We had that hearing, and I heard her say that DFSS decided that they weren't going to fund an outside vendor. They don't have autonomy. I mean, it's a comprehensive plan. And so if DFSS decides they are going to pull out and this other department pulls out, we're all on the same team. I know the county pulled out. And so this plan was sort of gutted of how we address our youth, but that's where we have to focus. And so DFSS has a something else they're going to be doing. We still have JISC in place with the police department. So now we've competing. That's where we talked in the previous hearing, that the deputy mayor to be the one that's overseeing all of that to make sure it's comprehensive.
Alderman Thompson, your time is running out, but just to put a period on this, that was discussed by Deputy Mayor Lee, that they were in the process reformatting, refiguring, rethinking the operation of the JISC.
Madam
And
Chair, I have a point of clarification.
I'm not finished speaking, Alderman. I'll call on you.
Okay.
That they were in the process of rethinking that entire program. I believe Alderman Moore made a suggestion about looking at perhaps collaborating more with the county as a way of, one, saving money, but also two, having a more comprehensive approach. So that had been discussed, Alderman.
I know, Chairman, but if I may, that's when it was originally set up. That's who was involved. It was the county, it was the city, and then everyone peeled back, and even within our own departments now, we have DFSS that pulled out, and now we're sitting there with just the police, and we have money allocated for a program that clearly isn't a comprehensive. So I don't know why we would allocate money to a department. Just everyone stop and come up with a plan first. And if we can't get collaboration from other governments, then we do it on our own. At the very least, the departments that fall under our jurisdiction within the city should be coordinated and not competing, which is what we have today.
Right, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that both the county and the city was put a reset button on, and Alderman Moore was talking about a new program that was just announced yesterday by the county that he thought that the city should take a look at as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair.
Right.
Thank you.
Alderman Vasquez.
Yeah,
point
thank
of
you.
Information.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the point of information is from that hearing. DFSS stated they took the money out because they had philosophical disagreements over multiple years with CPD, and that is why they pulled out their $500,000 from the program. So, and kind of to what Alderwoman Smith mentioned, yeah, if the conversation is more about funding, that could go to DFSS to run the program because they were pulling out because they were not in agreement with the CPD.
Thank you, Alderman Vasquez. That wasn't a point of information. That was a point of your position. But
well, the point was why
no
they said
problem.
they believe.
It's fine. Okay.
Thank you, Alderman Thompson. Alderman Harris, followed by Alderman Irving.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. As we're talking about the police budget, I think that to get our grapples around stuff, there are certain issues that are directly impacted by other departments, other budgets, and other issues. So on the violence prevention side, which is not part of CPD's budget, and I totally get that, but I feel that we need to, as we're talking about how we're going to partnership, and that's all I'm hearing is partnership, working together, and we're team. So part of the team is definitely the violence prevention leg of budgeting, and how do we help communities that are struggling, and the resources. I'd like for us to really look at our violence prevention programs in communities of color on the south and the west sides, and where the funding streams are going. These programs, if they are given to the right organizations, can help as we talk about our violence in our community with our children and with our communities. If they're given to the right organizations, these programs can help. And I guess I'm not asking a question as much as I'm making a statement about where and who we're funding to help us with our violence issues that directly impacts Chicago Police Department's budget. So we can't say on one hand that we don't want police for whatever reasons, with all the violence breaking out on the south and the west sides of the city, where in my universe, we're not asking for defunding, we're asking for more, because we have high incidence of violence, but we're funding organizations that have no impact. So if we're going to link and tie and change behavior and help the police, or even as we talk about squeezing a budget on the Chicago Police Department, if we're not going to fund the right organizations on the violence prevention level, then that's a part of the budget that either we eliminate or we get rid of until we figure out which organizations are actually going to do the job of actually being violence preventers that know communities of color, that can interact with us, because we're funding groups and organizations with millions of dollars from our budget that are ineffective. So I want us to start looking at a more proactive prong in terms of connecting these. The Chicago Police Department should be a major part of the decision-making as we fund these organizations, and no longer can somebody just be funded because they the big name in the house and they got a reputation of doing stuff that is now outdated and ineffective and doesn't work today. So, and this is more of the deputy mayor lead that these programs come up under you. So I want you to take a different look at who and how we fund folks. As we talk about saving money, we're giving one organization $70 million, and maybe they're good at doing A and B, but certainly D and C, they awful at, which is actually, they become outdated and their programs are outdated. So I want to have a sit down and have a more offline conversation about these organizations, again, that can help the Chicago Police Department be a better group and be a better organization if they get help from the people that they're supposed to be getting the help from.
And Chairman Austin, I'm Chairman Harris. I do appreciate your point. In October, and I hope you could join us in October, I did initiate a resolution, I believe in June or July, where we are calling Metropolitan Family Services as well as all the organizations that operate under CP4P before the Committee on Public Safety, so that we can find out what level of engagement they are having in the community and what success. But more important, I know many of our colleagues do not know what they're doing, and they do receive millions of dollars of funding. So I look forward
But I want a commitment from the deputy mayor that it's fine for us to feel this way, but at the end of the day, somebody above our head is making a decision on what organizations to fund for our communities. So I want a commitment that she will be looking at that and seeing that now, it's not going to be the status quo, that we're going to be fine with these organizations that aren't making any kind of change or moving the ball up the field.
So thank you for that. As you know, Alderwoman, this process of violence reduction funding was RFP'd through an objective process. Mayor's office did not have a role in selecting or scoring any of the applicants that went through CDPH RFP process. Having said that, it's very clear in that RFP that those who have been awarded are accountable for certain outcomes and tracking data, which I hope will be part of Chairman Talaferro's public safety hearing on violence prevention outcomes.
Well, then certainly then we need to be talking about with CDPH about the RFPs, how and why smaller agencies or companies that we know have boots on the ground and we have relationships, it's fine for us to fund them, but if the Black Caucus doesn't know who these guys are, then they don't exist in my books. And so fine that they picked them. I want to know what the outcomes are if they have no relationships with the people of color where the issues are, where the violence is happening. So certainly, I think that has to be a part of it. And I'm not saying that I don't know Metropolitan Family Services. I do know them. I don't know them in the violence prevention side of the universe. So definitely, I'll be thrilled to sit with Chairman Talaferro to talk about with them when he has his public hearing on that. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you for letting me kind of get you all off base and off the issue.
Thank you, Chairman Harris.
Thank you.
Alderman Irving, followed by Alderman Lopez. Is Alderman Irving still with us? Alderman Irving?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Alderman Irving.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
We can, yes.
Okay. Couple questions here. I think you made Public Safety Administration. We talked about the number of positions that have been filled. Do we have an answer for that, or is that something you have to get back to us? And also, how many positions reduced from CPD's budget went into Public Safety Administration?
I have a number somewhere in my office, but I can definitely put that through the chair. And then you want us to know how many at PSA were filled or at CPD?
A PSA.
Okay.
Okay. Secondly, are any federal resources available for the hiring of police officers, new police officers like the COPS grants or any other resources available from the state or from the federal government?
The COPS grant is our main grant program that allows for hiring of additional police officers. So it's about 25 every year. And you know, we don't get enough money to fully fund the 25. So our portion of it is greater than the grant, but it does provide us funding for, on an annual basis, 25 officers.
Okay, I think my colleague talked about the violence prevention funds. And again, you know, the city seems to have had a very high level approach to doing this. I think we need to get down a little deeper into the weeds on this, because what we're hearing and what we're seeing in the streets are that the boots on the ground in some cases have no connection to the communities in which they're serving. So we definitely need to look through that. And I look forward to the hearing that Chairman Talaferro is going to be having on that issue. Two kind of budgetary, additional budgetary questions. Could we look at our enterprise funds pay for police services? What prevents us from having those officers at the airports be assigned and paid on an overtime basis and send those resources back to the district? And if somebody wants to sign up to go to the airport, let them do that as part of special employment or part of an overtime assignment, but that those officers be committed back to district law enforcement.
So is your proposal then, so right now the way we budget for our enterprise fund officers is that they're actually budgeted on the fund directly. And their overtime is also attributed to, if it's at the airport, it's at the airport. So I guess it's your question, could we detail them back to the district? And then, so any overtime they would incur would have to go on the corporate fund, if so. Is that?
No,
is that
any
your
overtime that they would incur would go to the enterprise fund. And because that's where they're actually performing the job, right?
Well, so this is where we've had a lot of discussion with aviation on the right allocation of, you know, we need to ensure that any funding that is paid for by our enterprise funds is work also being done for the enterprise funds. So if they're incurring overtime, let's say, for example, you know, because they're assigned to the 3rd district, then technically that overtime needs to get accounted back to corporate. Like the airports do not want to cover that overtime because they're not doing work out there, even though there are assignments out there. So there's a lot of.
But if the officer assigned to the 3rd district is working at the airport, shouldn't the airport pick up the tab when the officer for the 3rd district is out there? If it's a special employment assignment or
I agree there too.
Assignment?
Yes, it goes vice versa. So if we
what
had
I'm
someone in
saying-
patrol.
Right. So what I'm saying is that if these officers are assigned back to district law enforcement and that they at overtime work at the airport or work other places, you know, those officers feasibly could come back to district law enforcement. Is that correct?
So they're already in district law. Your question is, if they worked at the airport, we could definitely assign that overtime back to the airport. Yes. If they're budgeted in corporate at district law.
That's correct. So
yes,
wouldn't it may be more cost effective for us to look at, instead of having these officers parked in the enterprise fund, they could be back in district law enforcement and be paid overtime out of those resources at the in the enterprise funds if they need to be.
I see what you're saying. So we can, I mean, yeah, I mean, so but we would still have to then, if we move them back to corporate, have to pick up their salary on corporate. Right now, if they're assigned to the airport, their fringe, their pension, their benefits, everything is paid for by the enterprise funds. So, and their portion of it. Now, if we decide that we want to move them back to corporate and to district law, then, you know, corporate would have to pick that up. And then we, you know, anytime there's work done at the airport, we would submit that to the airport. So I would recommend it's easier keeping them and then vice versa back in, because if there's something we would have to cover, but their main assignment and where they're assigned to is the airport. And then the airport is then responsible for all of their costs, which includes fringe, pension, and their salaries.
But at the same time, you're looking at the potential for a lot of vacancies in district law enforcement and from the police department in general, right? So we have to figure out some way to fill these vacancies back in.
Yes, I get where you're going.
Yes,
I see what you're saying. Is, you know, if we need more staff.
So we got to. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't have my budget book in front of me, but I do know we have numbers at the airports that we could possibly look at. The other question that I want to ask you, and it's something to look at, state law allows any municipality to utilize part-time police officers. Have we looked at the possibility of using part-time police officers to do some things that could help free up more resources to deal with, you know, violent crime? Like, for example, there's not a day that goes by that I do not get a call at our office about residential permit parking, or somebody parked in my handicap spot, or these guys are flying through the stop sign. You know, we got a traffic section. They seem to only work on accidents. But let's try to prevent some accidents. And we may need to have some flexibility on how we can do some things, or even through this district coordinating officer program, some people that can interact with our folks. They could be retired officers or young people wanting to become police officers. Many municipalities use cadet programs, use other avenues to get officers. This may be a way for us to invest some time early on to know if these officers will be good and productive people for the city. So this may be something that also could be a cost-saving measure, but also give us a first look at good officers for the potential to be full-time officers here in the city. And my final point is the looking at the resource allocation about beat or district realignment. The beats have been the same for the last 40 years, 50 years, with very limited exceptions. If we look at that, we may find some cost savings on places that officers don't need to be, potentially moving them to places they need to be, and the potential to look at, do we need officers in a specific community, or do we enlarge the area that they're covering to be commensurate with the level of crime that exists?
So that's a good question. I don't know if Deputy Mayor Lee might have a better, but, you know, under consent decrees, we are going to have, you know, and I know CPD is working on a pilot. Some of the positions we gave them last year was to do the span of control within a beat as under the consent decree, and make sure, you know, whether it's 1 to 8, 1 to 10. So that is something that I know, I don't know about the realignment, but we are looking at the supervision within the beat as part of under the consent decree. So I will bring that up to CPD as well.
But you're not looking at.
Thank you, Alderman Irvin. Yeah, Alderman Irvin, we got to kind of move on a little bit. Did you want a round two?
I guess so then. All right.
Okay. Alderman Lopez, followed by Alderman Brooking.
Thank you, Chairman and Chairman. I have a couple questions real quick. Director Park, have you had a chance to look at COFA's recommendations for the reduction of the police department's budget?
COFA's that we went over today, yes.
Yes. In your estimation, do you believe that there is $54 million that is easily removed from this budget
Unfortunately,
as outlined by COFA?
not for 2021, because definitely the ones that are contractual, we are unable to move at the moment.
And those would be in the non-personnel reductions that are the contractual issues?
Both the non-personnel and
Like
the
tuition
personnel.
reimbursement, uniform
Yes,
allowance?
those are all, those are contractually required for, yes.
So both categories are contractually required?
The supervisor's quarterly is, the specialty pay is, the tuition reimbursement also is, and the uniform allowances, as well as the physical exams is also.
How much have we allocated in the 2020 budget for the police contract? For the back pay for the police contract?
There is none in the 2020 budget.
What was the offer that was made then rejected by the police? What was the value of that?
I actually don't know. I don't have the value in front of me, so I could put that through the chair.
If you could provide that through the chair, because I think that's going to also be a question for us moving forward. Because obviously we've heard from a number of advocates who are stating that they want to see a 75% reduction in the police department's budget. As we're looking at the numbers that both you and Dennis shared, almost 90% of this budget is basically fixed item. So anyone believing that they could wipe out 75% of fixed item spending, unfortunately, will not see what they want to see. So when we get down to it, how much of this budget actually do we have room to finagle with based on the spending that we have? And what is not contractual versus what is contractual?
So, I think the reduction really comes down to personnel. As you saw on the non-personnel side, I mean, we're doing our work to try to bring down settlements and judgments. And I know that's a lot of the work that our risk manager is working through. We're doing a lot of work on any non-personnel to see if there is, any areas that we can, bring down. But as you can see, the non-personnel is a small portion of the budget. So then it comes down to really personnel. It's, vacancies. It's, what's the right number? What does the police department need for operations? And that's because a lot of the contractual costs are tied to the number of personnel. So that's, 89% of the budget is personnel.
So I think as we look at like the non-personnel, which I think COFA listed as 12%, 190 million, even if we were able to get 25% reduction of that, we are looking at best seeing about $45 million in savings if we're able to eliminate that by 25%. If we look at the vacancies and we're to wipe them completely off the budget, that would get us about another 50 million off the budget, which I think for those who are watching this and paying attention, best case scenario right now is $100 million that we could get off the 2020 budget if we were to start cutting from the numbers that we have. The reason that I bring up the police contract is because whether we are acquiescing to what the mayor wants with regards to restrictions, or it's going to go to arbitration, there'll be no restrictions on back pay, I'm sure it's going to be close to whatever savings we just squeezed out of the numbers that I just threw out right now. So I just want to make sure that people understand as we're having these conversations about allocation and where our priorities are, that whatever gains that we're literally talking about right now will be more than likely wiped out by the arbitration of the FOP's contract, in my estimation. So we really need to come up with a very different solution as it relates to the budgeting if we're trying to do like a number of my colleagues, like Alderman Kappelman suggested, which is to allocate resources on the basis of calls versus just generally throwing out more and more dollars out there to have police respond to more and more issues that they're ill-equipped to address. I think I just want to piggyback on one thing, Chairman, if I may, and that is something that I know a number of colleagues like Alderman Harris have brought up. is the use of our anti-violence and our violence interrupting groups. I look forward, and I think that whatever savings we are able to get from CPD, we need to reinvest in programs like Ready and others, which we have started under Mayor Emanuel, which Alderman Dahl and Alderman Scott were instrumental in pushing the mayor to create. But we need to get past public-private partnerships and start fully funding these as city programs. And I think having greater control over the outcomes through programs like that will help our police officers in the long run. Because too often, it's not just the players that are coming in that nobody knows, it's the players that are coming in and actually working against us, causing more harm than good. Lastly, I would leave Susan Lee with this, is that we need to ensure at the base of everything that we do that's public safety related, that beat integrity is not compromised any more than it has been over the last 5 months. Last night, to piggyback off what Alderman Reboira stated, the 9th district had a situation where almost a third of the district was at the Mariano's parking lot because of drag racers shooting off guns at Archer and Ashland. It took an hour for us to get those city assets that have been so touted, like salt trucks and plows, to the area just to try and cordon off that parking lot. With all the police that were responding to that, the rest of the district was left unprotected and unguarded from many of the gangs who were shooting like crazy following this. So I want to make sure that we have not lost that as we're having discussions about prioritization on spending. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez.
Chairman, I just want to correct something from Alderman Lopez. I was not instrumental in the Ready program.
Thank you.
Put that out there.
Thank you, Chairman Dow. As a point of information, everyone, Deputy Mayor Susan Lee does have to leave after Alderman Brookins. Alderman Brookins, followed by Alderman Wagasback, and Alderman Wagasback will be the last committee member, and we will move forward with non-committee members after that. So Alderman Brookins, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well.
So the question I have, Director Parks, with respect to settlement and judgments, is that the line in the police budget or is that a line somewhere else?
That one is in the police budget.
What have we allotted for that?
$82 million is the line.
And where are we from last year to date? Are we over or below what we allotted?
We expect it to come in within budget. What we did last year is we did increase the budget to better align with what our costs have been. So we do anticipate it coming in budget.
All right. The other question is with respect to the police officers who are assigned to either the airport, not the airport, to CHA, to CPS, do we recover the cost dollar for dollar? Is it over? Is it less? How does that work?
So we've done a lot of work with CPS on the SRO program. So we are getting, what the cost for those officers that are assigned to CPS. Similarly, we are working on updating our IGA with CHA to better align for those costs.
So the cost including the pension amount?
We include kind of a set percentage for a portion of, so we included our general fringe rate for each of the officers. So it does include a subset of the pension, the healthcare, all of that. There's a calculation that the comptroller's office has.
Is that based on an average or of what a police officer costs?
Yes. So it depends on the rate of the actual salary of the police officer. There's a sliding scale for how we break that out.
And the police officers who are assigned to these kind of specialty units, do they skew older where their cost to the city is more than the average, or is that known?
Oh, that's a good question. I think looking at the SRO program, I mean, they're definitely more in the average range versus, the $48,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 range. But it does, there are a lot of different salary points for the people that are assigned to this detail.
I guess And the only reason I ask is if a assignment at CPS is considered a plum assignment and people can bid, and you have officers who've been on the job longer.
Sure.
And we're only basing it on the average cost, whereas these officers tend to skew above average, then are we actually getting the money back?
So let's take, I would take CPS out of the equation right now because I know there's a lot of work that's been done around the SRO program and the qualification. So that's kind of a separate distinction. I think for CHA, we used to have the Park District and even the CTA detail. That's a good question. I do think it does skew a little more towards the higher end officers. And that's where, you know, we are kind of, as we're working through an updated IGA to get a better cost for our officers.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Brookins. I do see that Alderman Wagisbeck has his hand up for round two. We will call non-committee members first, and then we will go back to round two where we will have Alderman Wagisbeck. It looks like Alderman Vasquez is next. Alderman Vasquez followed by Alderman Haddon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for everything you're doing. I guess my first question is, we're talking a lot about the police budget. Why do we not have anybody from CPD here?
We answered that question, Alderman Vasquez, which is that the focus of this hearing was, subject matter hearing was on the budget, specifically the budget numbers and questions that people had related to the numbers. We weren't focusing on operations. If there are operational questions, if you want to put them out there, we through the chair can get answers to you in advance of the budget hearing.
God, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, because just a kind of context for efficiency on some of the programs, but I understand that. Thank you. I have a couple questions. One is, you know, can through the chair, can we get the presentations that everyone showed today, just so we can kind of dig through some of that as well? I saw on one of the slide decks, the slide deck that Susie presented, that there was like 11 million on software maintenance and licensing, 1.7 in IT maintenance. What is the total cost of like data tracking software and like the tech used? Because every time we want to get more information and transparency and accountability, it feels like we never get the tracking on this stuff. So I'm kind of curious as to what's being used and more specificity around that.
So we could provide a little more detail, but you're right. Like the software maintenance line is about $11 million, and IT maintenance is about 1 to 2. So it's not a huge dollar amount around the IT, but we can break that down for you and get that through the chair.
Yeah, I'd love that, just to see if there's stuff that we can do better. I think in thinking about the budget in general, if we do the investment on the front end about the tracking and the data, we can find savings or how to reallocate or how to restructure a grid system, perhaps for the different districts. So yeah, that would be helpful. So in 2017, the FOP said that the way to cut down is to have more officers and then cut down on OT. So I imagine in 2017, there were measures that were being taken as well in response to that. What measures were being taken, and was there an actual savings shown or a cutting down of OT? You know, it's different post-COVID because I understand how those numbers get completely thrown off. But as far as pre-COVID, were we on plan to fix the overtime issues with the measures that were being taken?
Yes. So, and a lot of what we were doing is working through, you know, who is signing off on overtime? Who is the accountable person? You know, what is it that and we know, you know, overtime at the police department is not, you know, 95 divided by 12, but that there is a flow to it that, you know, so on the non-summer months, for example, like should you know, what's the right number to be in at February or December versus July? And what are the right targets? What are all the units doing? Why are they incurring overtime? You know, we've had those conversations. I think we all understand overtime as it relates to, you know, Memorial Day or Labor Day or, you know, holidays and events. But what's happening on a Tuesday, you know, in the 5th district, like those are where a lot of the work is happening, you know, with the Detective Bureau, with, the organized crime, which, is, I know, a new name, but, what is that work? How much is reimbursement? Are we getting all the reimbursable money that we should be getting for special events, for example? So it was a lot of that type of work that we embarked on early on, where we started to see some headway because we were essentially really focused every month on what those numbers are, and the story behind each of them. Now, I understand, where we are right now is where we are, but we will get back to that and really start focusing on that. And so, Superintendent Brown has been a great partner. He did, back earlier on, sergeant or lieutenant could approve overtime, and he changed that all the way up to a deputy chief. So I think that made a difference. And just the accountability of who's approving overtime and what is it for. So that work will continue. I think they were making good progress, and we will continue to do so next year. So it's not something we're gonna, let up on. And we hope to see that come in. I think, as I said to Alderman Thompson earlier, but for COVID and the, unplanned emergencies that we have to, staff, we would have been, a little bit over half our budget, and we would have been on track, I think. So, I think there's still work to do though.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I remember when Superintendent made those changes. As far as like the tracking on like the overtime, to your point, like catching trends, understanding where it's being utilized, is that all stuff that's being tracked digitally, or is it a lot of this like forms that are being filled out by different people and like reporting?
We're moving to much more digital. Like we have a Tableau, we're tracking it over, Tableau. Police has moved a lot their overtime approval process electronically, so we can see it quicker. So that's some of the benefits too. We used to have to wait for the yellow slips to get handed in and signed off, and then so we wouldn't really get a feel until like a month or two after. We are, getting that data a little bit quicker because the approval process is online. So, CPD has moved that process electronically. So it is improving and there's room for improvement.
Well, and the reason I asked, obviously the line of questioning here, right, is that if we improve all that, we get the data we need and we're able to make better adjustments. And I think to Alderwoman Harris's point, like about who gets the funding and who's the biggest name in the house, CPD is the biggest name in the house. It is why they have the biggest budget. So if anyone's got the money to invest in making that, modernized, that would be the department to look at to then see cost savings over the long run. So any information that's pertinent to that, like you mentioned that it's moving in a direction of digitization, or how fast is that movement? What percentage is that? Like that kind of data through the chair, I'd like, because, it's obviously a lot of minutia to it. I want to dig through that and figure it out. So I'd love to get as much as we can.
And I'll be honest, I don't know if I can pull all of, the speed and things like that. I think we can maybe pull, time and attendance is another thing that as a city, we're trying to move to a better platform. That is older. It's an old system, but where I'm sure there's cost savings there once that's implemented. I know CPD has moved is trying to move to a lot of digital and just more things to a dashboard. So there's work being. So I guess my point is we can definitely try to list something out. I may not have like how far along it is in the speed, but at least, we can start a conversation.
Totally, like an overall conversation, I think is a good place to start. So I appreciate that.
Alderman Vasquez, thank you. We do have to move on.
People get like double the amount of time. Can I finish at least a couple questions here?
Alderman Vasquez, we've already been up for like 7 minutes, and we've been trying to stick as close as possible to 5 minutes. I've allowed some people to go off to 6 or 7 and even 8. But you're at 7 minutes going on 8. So go ahead and ask your last question and we'll move forward from there.
Yeah, I guess I'll just switch the question up because of that, because I don't know that I can do a second round. I'll send some of the emails, but I guess if I've got one question left, if we're looking at the amount of spending that's going on as far as the settlements, year over year, over $600 million in the past 10 years, an average of what was 52 million per year, and multiple years of conversations about police accountability. I guess my question for the chairman is, when can we have a public safety committee on police accountability?
As soon as we get an opportunity, Alderman.
Okay.
As you know, my public safety committee's schedule is busy every month. In fact, we've even gone to having 2 meetings a month, and that may have to increase to even 3 meetings a month. But as soon as we can have it, I definitely will have one.
Totally, because I was the one who put the legislation to try to get more meetings a month. And I think we don't have the opportunity for the city. We've been talking about it, and if we want to have the trust between communities and police, we need to have the conversation now. We can't wait another year. But thank you for the time.
Thank you, Alderman Vasquez. Alderman Haddon, followed by Alderman Taylor.
Thank you to both our chairmen today. And thank you to Director Park, and I know Deputy Mayor Lee is gone. I'm gonna I'm using a timer, staying within my time here, guys. I appreciate folks for hanging around. I respect the time, the questions, the conversation that we've had, and the space being given to this conversation. And even in holding respect for you guys and the individuals here, I'm going to speak with some frustrations from the perspective of residents of the 49th Ward. I feel like we are having the wrong conversation. I am very disappointed that this has been so strictly limited to the budget, because even listening to my colleague Alderman Kappelman's questions, you guys tried to tell him that was not budgetary related. What is the budget? What is the representation of the public dollars we are putting towards paying people for services if the conversation is not about what services our residents are getting? I know we've heard an answer a couple of times to why we don't have representation from the Chicago Police Department here. And I respect that. I know folks are busy. Deputy Mayor Lee is gone now. And so one question I have is, I'm hearing the same thing. I've only been here for 18 months, and I'm hearing the same conversations around, well, okay, well, here's the money and we can't cut here. I don't think the conversation is about, at least from my ward's perspective, of cuts we're making. It is, how are we going to provide better public safety to the residents of Chicago? And why is someone not here from the police department to explain what they're doing or not doing, or what they see that they need? And so one of my questions is specifically, is having Deputy Mayor Lee or Budget Director Park here a way to tell me that you two are the people responsible? Who is responsible? Who are the people that need to be accountable for the spending of resources within the Chicago Police Department? Who's responsible?
Alderman, who's your question addressed to?
Hey, it's whoever's going to answer it. Who is responsible for making budgetary decisions for spending our money on resources in the Chicago Police Department? Who's the person responsible?
I believe
ultimately the city council, right? Ultimately the city council, because we vote on the budget. But Alderman Haddon, the purpose of the hearing today was the sole purpose, according to the resolution that Alderman Lopez put out, was to discuss the 2021 budget prior to the passage of the actual budget.
Absolutely.
And it was an opportunity for you to identify questions that you might have about the budget, ideas that you might have for how we make changes in the budget. And I think that the hearing today has lived up to that.
I think some of the questions certainly have, absolutely, but my question still stands. So City Council is responsible for where we and how we allocate the funds, but I'm talking about performance. So several of my colleagues' questions have been around performance. Alderman Hairston, Alderman Kappelman, we're having some great discussions about what should police do, but that comes down to how are we spending our money? So I still need an answer to who is the Chicago Police Department person or the administration person who's responsible for making the decisions? Because departments come to us and say, here's how much money we need to do our jobs. But who is having the conversation and making the decision to justify that proposal?
Alderman Haddon, I think the chairman really just answered it. You know, they come to us with a recommendation, and it's up to you. Hold on, let me finish.
No, really, just a really quick. I heard the answer.
No, you have not. You haven't heard me speak. You have not heard me speak. Okay. And so I respectfully listen to the question, and whenever you pose a question to someone, it's only respectful to allow them to answer. And so you pose a question, who's responsible? You know, and the Chicago Police Department, along with our budget director, they all present to us budget recommendation as to what they believe they need for their operational expenses for a fiscal year. And then it's up to us to have budget meetings to discuss those and to have conversation about those. But that does not mean that we can't even go offline outside of a budget hearing to talk to the police department. They are always at our disposal. Ms. Park is always at our disposal. So it's ultimately our responsibility when we, outside of our budget hearing and within our budget hearing, they submit a recommendation, so we become responsible for approving it or disproving it. Or our disapproval of it.
Thank you, Chair, for that answer. My question wasn't who's responsible for approving the budget. So when I work on my budget, I say, these are the goals that I have. These are the responsibilities I have. Here's how I'm justifying how I'm spending things. And so I know when we had a briefing for first-year aldermen last week or so, Director Park, you mentioned that we weren't going to dig into that in this hearing. And I hope that we'll have time. But so much of the conversation, and like, you know, I'm not being disrespectful here, and you guys don't need to get defensive. I'm not criticizing this hearing, but challenging us to really get to the question. You've got people wanting to defund the police by 75%. You've got folks who want more cops in their community. What we all want is public safety for residents of Chicago. And I don't think that we're really getting to the meat of that. And I want to know, when are we going to have that conversation? You know, hearing from Deputy Mayor Lee that, oh, for years we've been talking about another crisis response team, knowing that we're so far behind on consent decree things. I fully recognize the difficulty that we're facing, and also we need to have a different conversation. And I'll end with a question that is a through the chair request specific to the budget, which is really just focused on the specialized units. Because this is the kind of conversation, like, I want to know, my residents want to know, you know, what are police doing? Why aren't they responding to our calls? Why aren't they enforcing things? Why are we spending so much money on it? Where's money going? So for the specialized units in CPD, the website, I count 6. I'm wondering if someone could confirm, is that how many units we have? How many people do we have assigned to each of those specialized units? And what's the spend on each of those? You know, like, I get general numbers that I see available about officers within our district. I've got good communication with our commander, and I feel like they're doing their best, but there's some real gaps between how we're using resources and the results of services that residents are getting.
Director Parks, do you want to respond to?
So I do want to clarify, just to Alderman Haddon, did you go on, it's the special units at CPDs in CPD?
Special units at CPD, I counted 6. I've, you know, the website's got information on kind of the general, like, what they are and who they are. I would love more detail. I know you and Alderman Smith's question gave some answers to the numbers of people within the JISC, which is under the special investigative units. But would like that kind of detail on all of them, including, I know you had like salary information available offhand, but it can be through the chair, just
okay. And I think there's more than 6. So we'll look at, you know, that's why I just wanted to make sure I can go on CPD's website and kind of see what buckets they have them in. And then we will get you that information through the chair.
And Alderman Haddon, I'm not being defensive, but I do want to make a suggestion. I'll give you an example, you know, about how you make change. Right, which is what I think you're seeking, which all of us are seeking in some way in different pots, right? So, and I'll just use the GIST as an example. So a few of us have gotten together and, you know, we sit and we talk about this. We have reached out to Susie before today. We've talked to, some of us have talked to the Inspector General, and we've decided on an approach that we might be interested in pursuing. So now we're in the process now of having those difficult conversations with the administration around that issue, for example. And I think that's how things get done, you know. And so I would encourage you, if there's an area that you have a specific interest in. Some people here have an interest in the violence prevention stuff and a meeting around that, getting information around that. So I think it's a process, and I'm always available as the budget chair to help you formulate an approach. And so I put that out there to you.
I appreciate that, Chairman Dow, and I appreciate the work that folks are doing, digging into the specialty areas. In addition to that, we also need to think about the larger conversations and how we're reframing things for our residents. And I again would just say, I know a big frustration from our ward is this tension of, well, if we're calling 911 and police aren't showing up, or if we're having shootings and police aren't showing up, or if we're not solving crimes, right? Or, what are we doing? And a lot of folks want to support the police, and a lot of folks want to have something totally different. And so, looking at it piecemeal by piecemeal or program by program, I feel like puts us in a position of some of the conversation today, not all, which is, well, some people want to cut funds, but this isn't just about cutting funding. It's about improving what we do as public safety. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Haddon. Alderman Taylor, followed by Alderman Rodriguez Sanchez. Alderman Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon it is. My question was around the violence prevention. You said you all are going to give 10 million more additional dollars to violence prevention. Can we talk about how it will be dispersed? And what does violence prevention do as far as reporting what they do on a monthly basis? Is that something you all get? That's my first question.
So that's really a question for Deputy Mayor Lee, who I believe may have had to leave. But I can say that we did allocate $10 million additional than what was in the 2020 budget through our CARES Act funding that we received. So we did, and I would have to defer to Deputy Mayor Lee about where she is in terms of dispersing those funds and the plan there.
So is that
so
possible?
we can get you some more information, I guess, through the chair.
Yeah, Alderman Taylor. Who brought that up? Alderman Harris started the conversation around the use of the violence prevention money. I believe Alderman Irvin also added onto that about the desire to see people who have boots on the ground, who know our communities, do the work. I believe that Deputy Mayor Lee committed to having a meeting to discuss that on the one hand, and also Chairman Taliaferro has agreed to hold a meeting. I don't remember the date. I think you said in October, Chairman, that looks at these various community organizations that are getting this violence prevention money and the extent to which they're actually doing service in our wards.
So my next question is around what COPA's budget is in turn to the police budget. Is that added to this police budget, and how much is it?
COPA's budget, there's a floor actually, so it is connected to the police budget. I believe it's 1% of the total minus the grant fund. So it is that is the floor for COPA. And I could pull.
It's in the, okay.
I could pull, let me pull up the ordinance. I can tell you what their budget is for 2020. It's 13.7, it looks like.
13.7 million.
But it ain't, that's what I see here.
That was for 2020?
For 2020.
And you know what they're asking for this year?
We are working with COPA to see kind of what their additional needs are for 2021. So that's something that we are in the process of going through.
I had a question around Mr. Williams talked about the police and their own insurance. I want to, can you dwell on it a little bit about amount? Are we there? Is that definitely going to happen? Because if I'm correct, Commissioner Parks, we are over budget for CPD this year.
Over budget for CPD? No, but we are, I think that conversation came up as just a way to look at, for additional savings.
Okay. My last question is.
Excuse me, Alderman. Be a little more responsive to what you're asking. So the question about insurance for police officers, you know, them paying their own insurance came up. There was some discussion about the fact that I believe that has to be authorized at the state level. There was some concern raised by some members of the council that it really wasn't going to get us anywhere in terms of savings. Somebody else brought up some other cities that do something, I think Colorado or someplace, I think it was Alderman Smith. But I think you might have missed that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Last question, what's the racial makeup of CPD?
Oh, I'm sorry, you were asking for the demographics?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I have, I don't know if I have the full department one. And if I don't, I will get that through the chair. I have it for the classes. I don't have the full department, so I will get that to you through the chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Taylor and Alderman Rodriguez Sanchez.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. I'm first going to say that I share a lot of the frustrations that Alderman Maria hadn't brought up, so I'm appreciative of her for being able to voice those frustrations so that I don't have to, but I echo every word that Maria said that Alderman hadn't said. I have a few questions, and I have had to be coming in and out of this meeting. So if some of the things that I'm going to ask have already been asked, I would appreciate to have them sent to me through the chair, or whatever the answers for them are, if that is possible. I wanted first to know if we have an idea of what CPD's total budget is, including grant funding and other sources.
So CPD's total budget for 2020 is 1.7 billion.
And this includes grants and
it includes grants.
Every funding source.
Yes.
Does this include in-kind or donations that CPD gets from organizations, donations of equipment? Is this included in the budget or no?
No.
Do we have an idea of how much equipment, what would be the worth of equipment that CPD gets from other organizations? Do we have those numbers?
I do not. So I'm not sure if CPD is tracking that, but that's not something the budget office tracks.
Okay. Is it possible for us to be able to access that information somehow?
I can ask them to see if what they're if they have that.
Okay. Do we know how much we budgeted in 2019, 2020 for CIT training? I would love to know how much out of what we budgeted was used, how many officers were able to take the training, and if it was used in its entire, and I don't know how to speak English. if
in its entirety?
Yes, that.
We can definitely talk to CPD. I'm trying to see for we have that bucket here for CIT specifically, because we did under our consent decree amount include staff as well as for training. But if you are looking for training statistics and how many people have gone through that training, we can get that from CPD and through the chair.
Can you tell me how much is the funding for each district and how is that determined? How does district get the resources?
So the way the budget is broken out, it's not broken up by district. So patrol which I believe is now called operations, gets a, they have an allocation through the budget. It's mostly around personnel, but we don't break it down by district. So that's really up to CPD to determine, by district or how those resource requests are filled. But the budget is not broken down by district. So each district in the budget does not get a certain amount. The patrol division that supports all the districts, there's a budget there, but that does not, and if you saw my presentation at the beginning, the bulk of our budget is for patrol.
So, okay, so if I'm going to speak to my neighbors in the ward and they are asking how our resources allocate per district, because the 17th district, for example, I have a lot of neighbors that have noted that in the 20th district, there is half of the criminal claims that there are on the 17th, but their allocation of resources is bigger. So they have more officers. It's a smaller district. 17 has less resources. If I am going to explain to my neighbors how are those resources allocated, where do I go in order to be able to understand how are those resources allocated?
So if you're talking resources in terms of people, that's really, CPD. It's the, superintendent and the chief of patrol, and making that determination. So that's,
but that's not, but that would be related to how much money is allocated to the district, or no?
No, because we fund, all the personnel kind of in one bucket in the budget. It comes through our salaries and wages. Now, how CPD determines where people go, that's really an operational decision at the department level.
Okay. So there are no monetary considerations when we allocate resources, when CPD allocates resources for a district. They don't, CPD is not thinking about how much it costs.
In terms of people, I mean, what we have is the number of staff. So I think they're thinking through, we have a budget for salaries, but if there are 400 police officers, then it's really the superintendent who decides, who gets 50, does 50 go to each, or what that right number is and how that gets allocated.
Okay. And I wanted to touch on a conversation that we've been having, or that we are trying to have, in terms of reallocating funding for policing to crisis response. And I did introduce a council order with some of my colleagues. And what we are trying to do is see how we can use the mental health clinics in order to be able to deliver those services. I do want to say that the CAHOOTS program that has been mentioned here, they only use police reinforcements in less than 1% of the calls that they receive, and they've been in operation for over 30 years. They have been taking over crises in Colorado, in Eugene and Springfield, Oregon for 31 years, and they only have used police in less than 1% of the cases. So I think this would be a matter of deciding how do we classify the calls and have a very efficient system for that, right? And I do believe that we can do that, and we can fund that, and we should be funding that. So the arguments that I have heard in terms of this being a well thought project and process, yes, we should definitely think it through, but we do know that it's possible. In Denver, there's a very similar program that was modeled after Kahoot. They have only been in operation since June, and they have at this point responded to more than 350 calls, and they have never have been needed to call police in order to respond to these emergencies, right? Or to help them in any way. So this is being done in other places, and we need to look at how to do it, and we can do it. And we are spending a lot of money in policing, but not necessarily keeping people safe and giving people the actual resources that they need. So I would encourage everybody to look in your emails and look at the council order and help us move it through. And I would love to have that conversation with administration too. I have already talked to the mayor about this, and I think that I heard that administration has been working on crisis response for months, but we haven't been told anything about this, right? Like, we have not been invited into this conversation. So then when we come in and we introduce a council order, or we come in with the idea, we are told, oh, you should have talked to us first. But you can also talk to us, right? Like, you can also pull us in. You can also let the council know, we are working on this. We would like suggestions. We would like to know what you're thinking. This is a really important thing for the city. So I would really love to see it through.
Yeah, thank you, Alderman Rodriguez Sanchez. We certainly appreciate it, and thank you for your comments as well. But I do, as a point of information, I have to announce that we are losing Miss Director Park. She does have a previous meeting that was scheduled before this hearing, and so I know that Director Park does have to leave us, which leads us. We have one more non-committee member.
Well, Chairman, before we go to the non-committee members, I want to honor the committee members first, since Director Parks has to leave. So that was Alderman Wagisback and Alderman Irvin. Alderman Irvin was first on the list. Alderman Wagisback followed. If we could keep it to one question.
And Chairman, I'll defer. I won't ask my question. I'll go through the chairs to the budget director. So you don't need to call on me.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you very much for what you're doing, both of you.
Thank you, Chairman Wagisback. Alderman Irvin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will work through directly with the director and also with the superintendent on a couple items that I have left. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Alderman Rodriguez Sanchez, I would just recommend that you reach out also to, your point is well taken. It's a two-way street. But I would ask you to also reach out to Deputy Mayor Lee to have that discussion regarding your the elements of your order, which have merit. Alderman Cicho Lopez, we have to close. I just saw that you came in. Can you limit yourself to 2 questions?
Yes, of course, Chairman, and thank you. And I think one of the things that I wanted to ask the budget director has to do with the level of coordination that we have with Springfield. I know I heard, for instance, questions about ensuring that the Chicago Police Department have their own insurance, for instance. Those kind of decisions have a huge impact on our budget. So I just want to make sure that we have a real conversation about how we are going to put our priorities, with the Springfield. I think that deserves absolutely the discussion and debate, and hopefully or advocacy in Springfield. So, but again, maybe that's something that we can discuss, in the future, because I tell you, in some of the other, so that's the one, and I think maybe that we can do that through you, Chairman, and bring up those priorities for the budget. The other one has to do with violence prevention programs. I think that many of us have been left without a lot of resources in a really critical time. So I'll again, I just want to make sure that there's a follow-up, because we keep asking these questions. I've received $0 in terms of that. And I think this is a time where we need to make sure that we collaborate. Again, Springfield did allocate some resources for us. So I will just urge the administration to make sure that we have a serious agenda and priorities that are discussed with the members so that we can identify those priorities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Cicho Lopez. The violence prevention question has come up a number of times by our colleagues. There definitely will be a post-joint committee meeting on that, and Chairman Taliaferro is holding a hearing in October, I believe, on all of these violence prevention organizations, their funding, and their outcome and performance measures. In closing, I would like to thank I would like to thank my co-chairman, Alderman Chairman Taliaferro, thank you very much for doing this meeting with me. I think it's a very important topic. More discussion on this as we head into the budget season. I want to thank Director Parks for participating today, Deputy Mayor Lee, and COPA Director Ken Williams for their participation. There being no further business before the committee, can I get a motion to adjourn by the same roll call that was applied to determine quorum? Nobody
Alderman
wants.
Wagasback moves to adjourn.
Alderman Wagasback so moves. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The Joint Committee on Budget and Government Operations and Public Safety is hereby adjourned.